My name is Marek Orlov, a former Special Forces operative from Slovenia, trained to think clearly when death hovered just a breath away. After years of classified operations, I had grown used to shadows, to the feeling that something was always watching. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the northern reaches of Siberia, near the border of the Taimyr Peninsula. I had come here ostensibly to monitor a series of abandoned meteorological stations that had gone dark for over a decade. Officially, it was a routine inspection for salvage operations, but the truth was far more personal. One of my old contacts, another ex-operator, had vanished in the same stretch of frozen tundra, leaving only garbled radio chatter behind. I wasn't here to collect data. I was here to find answers, and if I was lucky, to survive. The wind here is a living thing. It doesn't just whistle through the skeletal remains of pine trees. It cuts and twists like an icy blade across your skin. My boots crunched over frost-hardened moss and frozen mud, the sound swallowed quickly by the vast emptiness. Sunlight barely penetrated the gray sky, casting everything in a dull, muted glow that made the snow and ice shimmer like broken glass. Each exhale formed a ghostly mist that clung to my parka hood. I could smell the iron tang of frozen earth beneath layers of ice, a scent that made my stomach churn slightly. At first, everything seemed abandoned in the expected way. The skeletal frames of old research towers, broken antennas twisted into grotesque angles, and the long-forgotten tracks of animals in the snow. But subtle oddities began to creep in almost immediately. Footprints, too large, too uniform, vanished as quickly as they appeared. My compass flickered, the needle twitching with an irregular, almost anxious rhythm. Radios I carried to monitor the stations hummed with static, whispering in the language of interference. I shook it off as environmental anomalies. That's what I had been trained to do, dismiss fear until evidence became undeniable. Still, a feeling of being watched clawed at the edges of my focus. I found myself turning in tight circles, scanning the horizon where nothing should exist, and yet I could feel eyes, hidden and cold, tracking my every movement. The thought was ridiculous. Predators in this region usually shied away from humans, and I was trained to survive against much worse than an animal. But my instincts, my hard-earned gut instincts, insisted on vigilance. I set up camp near the remnants of Station K-47, a tower that had once monitored atmospheric anomalies. The air was brittle, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the dim light. Every sound felt amplified. The cracking of ice beneath my boots, the low groan of metal bending under frost, and sometimes something else, something subtle like a shadow shifting against the snow. I kept my rifle close, safety off, scanning each snowdrift for signs of life. Sleep was secondary. Survival required alertness. Night fell swiftly. Here, darkness doesn't just obscure, it devours. It pressed against my eyelids, seeping into every crack in my mental armor. The aurora made a faint appearance, like green ribbons snaking across the sky like spectral fingers. At first, I found the light mesmerizing, almost comforting. Then I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Long, fluid, too quick to be human. I froze. My training kicked in. Breathing slowed, muscles tightened, every sense expanded. The movement vanished, leaving nothing but the pale glow of ice reflecting against broken metal. I whispered to myself, "Stay calm, analyze, predict." But even as I spoke the mantra, a low rumble echoed across the frozen expanse, vibrating through my boots, rattling the empty metal of the station. The sound was neither wind nor animal. It was deliberate. I rose, rifle in hand, stepping cautiously along a path carved into the ice. My boots made no more sound than necessary, and I moved with calculated precision. I followed the rumble, my eyes scanning for its source. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw the absence of it, the distortion it caused in the snow. Tracks, but not like those of any animal I knew. Wide, with claw-like impressions that curved unnaturally, leading straight into the heart of the station's ruins. Panic tried to rise, but I forced it down. This wasn't just a wild animal, it was intelligent, clever, calculating. My mind raced, piecing together the situation. I was alone. The weather would prevent anyone from finding me for days. Whatever was out there wasn't scared of humans. I could feel its attention now, it like heat against my back, probing, studying. Hours passed. I set up perimeter alarms using the little I could scavenge from the station: wires, sensors, anything that would make noise if something crossed. My flashlight illuminated ghostly shapes of twisted metal and frost-encrusted equipment. I checked each sensor repeatedly. The rumble returned, faint now but persistent, like a heartbeat echoing through the ruins. I wasn't imagining it. Then I heard the sound that changed everything: a voice. Low, guttural, almost human, but wrong. It didn't speak words, it mimicked them. My name, whispered across the ice: Marek. I spun, heart hammering, rifle raised. The wind swallowed the echo, leaving only my ragged breathing. The shadows stretched unnaturally in the aurora's light, and I caught a glimpse of movement too fast to track. My training screamed, "Don't run, don't panic. Gather intelligence, control the engagement." But fear had a weight I hadn't felt in years. I retreated into the station's skeletal structure, barricading doors and shoving debris into every crack. The cold here was relentless, but I barely noticed. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, ears straining for the slightest sound. That's when I realized the most terrifying detail. The snow outside, which had been undisturbed, now bore countless new tracks, always stopping just out of reach, never approaching fully, as if whatever was out there was toying with me. I spoke aloud to steady my mind, to remind myself of who I was. You're Marek Orlov. You survive, you adapt, you endure. Outside, the wind carried a low, rolling growl, but now it felt deliberate. The creature, or whatever it was circling, watching, calculating my moves. My survival instincts took over. I began setting traps, improvised with bits of metal, shards of ice, and remnants of the station. Every sound I made, every step I took, I imagined through its perspective, predicting its intelligence. It was smarter than I could have anticipated. Hours dragged. Exhaustion clawed at me, but I forced myself to remain alert. And then, finally, a window of opportunity. The creature, massive, almost invisible in the aurora's glow, passed too close to one of my makeshift alarms. A loud clang, a trap triggered, and I heard it recoil, a noise that was almost frustration. It wasn't gone, but it gave me time. I moved quickly, slipping past ruins and ice, guided only by instincts honed over decades. The wind was my ally, masking movement, carrying scent away. My body ached, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Somewhere, far in the distance, I glimpsed the outline of a helicopter, my extraction point. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the certainty that it was following. Not directly, but close enough to leave me trembling in fear. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that it was still learning, still observing, waiting for the moment it would strike again. I reached the helicopter, breathless and frostbitten, and collapsed into the seat. The engines roared, and the landscape of Siberia fell away beneath me. I exhaled, thinking the danger was behind me. But deep down I knew it wasn't. That thing had intelligence, it had patience, and it had the tundra, the ruins, and the shadows as its home. Even now, as I sit in the warmth of civilization, the memory doesn't fade. The whispers on the wind, the tracks in the snow, they haunt me. Marek Orlov survived, but whatever stalked the Taimyr Peninsula remains, and I can't help but feel that, one day, it will remember my scent and return. The warmth of the helicopter felt like a cruel joke. My muscles, frozen stiff in the Siberian tundra, twitched involuntarily, and my mind refused to calm. The pilot, a grizzled local named Petrov, kept glancing at me, asking questions I couldn't answer. How could I explain? I had survived, but not because of luck. I had survived because I understood one immutable truth. Whatever had been stalking me out there was not just a predator. It was thinking, and that intelligence made it worse than any human or animal I'd faced in the field. I tried to block the images from my mind, but they clawed back relentlessly. The creature, or the presence that had haunted the station, was impossible to categorize. Its movements weren't random. Tracks appeared where I didn't expect them, and sometimes they seemed to anticipate my decisions. My every step, my every breath felt like a test it was conducting, assessing my capabilities, my weaknesses. I realized something terrifying. If it wanted me dead, I might not have survived. Yet it hadn't killed me. Not yet. That restraint was deliberate, calculated. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every sound, every shift of shadow. I traced the paths I had taken, reconstructed the predator's approach, and noticed a pattern I hadn't understood at the time. It wasn't hunting in the conventional sense. It was learning, watching, waiting, preparing. My training screamed at me, "Don't let it know your fear," but the fear was already inside me, fermenting, twisting into obsession. The following morning, I returned, not willingly, but out of necessity, to the edge of the station ruins. The cold hit me like a physical blow, and the snow crunched beneath my boots with a menacing regularity. I knew the creature was nearby. I could feel it, as though the air itself were thickened with its presence. Every step was deliberate, every sound measured. The station loomed in the distance, a skeletal monument to the unknown. I saw the tracks again, this time more defined. They were enormous, with claws splayed in ways no animal I knew could manage. Some of the prints formed circles around broken antennas, others led directly into crumbling structures before vanishing entirely. I crouched, examining one closely, pressing my gloved fingers into the icy impression. The ground had been disturbed in a way that suggested intelligence, purpose. Whoever or whatever had made these marks wasn't just roaming, it was marking territory, testing me, mocking me. And then I heard it, a sound so precise, so deliberate that my training told me to freeze instantly. A low clicking noise, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Not a growl, not a roar, but a pattern, a beat. It seemed to echo from inside the station itself, bouncing off twisted metal walls and frozen windows. I scanned the ruin with my rifle raised, my fingers tightening on the trigger. The sound stopped abruptly when I aimed in one direction, then began again somewhere else. It was aware of me, watching, responding. I knew I couldn't retreat again, not without facing it head on. I moved slowly, keeping my silhouette low, shadows my allies, my ears strained for the faintest disturbance of snow or ice. The click repeated, faster this time, almost impatient. I followed it, winding through the wreckage, my boots careful not to alert the creature to my presence. Every sense screamed danger. Every instinct screamed survival. Then I saw movement, too fast to be human. It wasn't running. It glided, slipping over the snow and ice with unnatural speed. I raised my rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot cracked through the cold, loud enough to echo across the tundra. For a moment, everything froze. Then the shadows twisted. The creature, or whatever it was gone. No blood, no body, just emptiness. Panic threatened to rise, but I suppressed it. My training reminded me, think, adapt, improvise. It was testing me. I was learning, yes, but I had to stay ahead. I began to set traps, small, intricate devices using wire, ice, and jagged metal from the ruins. My goal wasn't to kill it. It was to delay it, create a perimeter, make it reveal its behavior patterns. I worked methodically, my mind sharp despite exhaustion, calculating probabilities with every trap. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, casting long, sickly shadows across the snow. I began hearing the clicking again, now accompanied by faint, almost imperceptible footsteps, too light, too fluid, like someone gliding over thin ice. The tracks led directly to my barricade. I waited, breath held, every muscle coiled like a spring, and then it struck. The door shuddered violently as something slammed against it. I fired blindly, the muzzle flash illuminating a shape that seemed impossible to comprehend. Taller than any human, limbs bending in unnatural angles, eyes glinting with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't screaming, but the sound it made resonated through my skull like ice shattering. It had adapted to my traps, circumvented my defenses, and now it was testing me directly. I didn't hesitate. I remembered every room-clearing exercise, every ambush tactic I'd learned in the field. I moved to the second barricade, throwing debris with precise force, knocking over a metal shelf that clanged against the floor. The noise was deliberate, designed to confuse and distract. It worked. The creature hesitated, then retreated into the shadows. Again, not dead, not gone, but waiting. I realized something vital. I wasn't merely surviving, I was participating in a mental chess game against something beyond comprehension. It studied me, adapted to my tactics, and left openings just to see if I would exploit them. I knew, with a clarity that chilled me, that if I misstepped, it would not just kill me, it would enjoy it. By the time dawn broke, painting the ice in pale oranges and sickly yellows, I was exhausted, shivering, mentally frayed. I had survived another night, but I understood the truth now. Whatever lurked here was patient, intelligent, and far from done. It had learned from me, remembered my patterns, and would return. Perhaps tomorrow. Perhaps in a week. Perhaps it would follow me out of this frozen hell entirely. I exhaled, my breath fogging in the cold morning air, and surveyed the ruins. Tracks crisscrossed my own, and in some I noticed something I hadn't before. Symbols, faintly carved in the snow, almost deliberate, almost mocking. Intelligence, planning, awareness. I was Marek Orlov, a survivor trained to endure the impossible. But even I understood now that survival in this place was temporary. The Tamir wilderness was its domain, and I was merely a guest, a terrified, haunted guest. And it was watching. Always watching. The sun had barely crested the horizon, yet the Siberian tundra felt darker than ever. The pale light did nothing to dispel the shadow that had settled into my mind. I had survived 2 nights here, moved carefully through the ruins, and learned more about my opponent than I ever wanted to know. But now, instinct screamed, something had changed. The presence wasn't content with observation anymore. It was closing in, studying me, calculating my next move with frightening precision. I am Marek Orlov, and in my years in the Special Forces, I had faced ambushes, snipers, and insurgents. I had survived explosions, frostbite, and being lost behind enemy lines. But nothing had felt like this. The cold air carried no ordinary scent, only the faintest metallic tang, like iron dissolved in frost. The tracks outside my barricade had multiplied, overlapping, crisscrossing, circling like some ritual I could not decipher. I knew I had to act fast. I gathered the remnants of the station, assembling a series of improvised traps. Metal shards tied with wire, broken antennae balanced precariously, shards of ice positioned to collapse under pressure. My rifle was loaded, every chamber checked thrice, and knives strapped to my belt for close combat. Yet as I surveyed my preparation, I felt the brush of eyes again, faint, almost imperceptible, tracking me from the snow beyond. It was smart, watching, waiting, testing my endurance. Then it made itself visible, or nearly visible. A shadow slipped across the snow, bending and twisting unnaturally, limbs stretching far beyond human proportions. Its eyes caught the faint morning light, reflecting it like shards of glass. I felt a pulse of dread deep in my chest, like a visceral recognition that this was no animal. No predator I had ever known. Its intelligence was alien, almost malevolent, and it had patience. I moved, slowly, deliberately, past the traps I had set, pretending ignorance, calculating its reaction. It mirrored me, keeping distance, shifting with impossible agility. The click, click, click sound it had made all night now came from multiple directions, a symphony of awareness. I realized it had learned my patterns, anticipated my movements. I had become a piece in its game, and the rules were not mine to set. Suddenly, one of my traps triggered. A shard of ice clanged against metal, and it recoiled, not with fear, but with deliberate calculation. I fired my rifle, aimed carefully at where its shadow had shifted. The shot echoed across the frozen plains, but again, there was no sign of impact. No blood. Nothing. Just movement, slipping back into shadow, observing. I cursed under my breath. This was not a fight I could win by conventional means. Improvisation was my only ally. I retreated into the deepest part of the station, where walls still stood, twisted but mostly intact. I set up a barricade from debris, metal, and ice, creating a choke point, something narrow, predictable. I had seen enough to know it preferred wide open spaces where it could maneuver, adapt, and strike unpredictably. This was a gamble, a test, and I was desperate enough to take it. The air grew still, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and then it came. Slowly, almost reverently, it approached the barricade. I could hear the faint scrape of ice against metal, a sound that made my blood run cold. My rifle was raised, heart hammering, every fiber of my being tense, ready. The shadow coalesced at the edge of the barrier, and I caught a glimpse of it. A figure taller than any man, limbs impossibly long, its head tilting unnaturally as though studying me, calculating my fear, measuring my reactions. I waited. It tested the barricade, nudging debris aside with clawed hands that left deep gouges in the frozen wood. I tightened my grip, counting each second in my head, remembering every tactical manual I had ever studied. Then, with a speed that defied human comprehension, it lunged. Instinct took over. I fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, then pivoted, knife in hand, striking at the fleeting form as it passed. The sound of metal against flesh, or something like it, echoed, followed by a guttural hiss. The creature recoiled, almost stumbling, but it was never fully injured. Its intelligence shone through in every movement. It adapted instantly, recovered, and circled back. This was no ordinary predator. It had learned from me, and it was playing a calculated game of endurance. I ran deeper into the station ruins, trapping doors behind me, improvising obstacles with broken metal and ice. My body screamed, lungs burning, frostbite creeping into my fingers, but fear and training pushed me forward. Outside, I could hear its movements, clicking, shuffling, a sound that resonated in the frozen ground, following me relentlessly. Finally, I saw the extraction point in the distance, the helicopter waiting, rotors idle for now. My adrenaline surged, every muscle screaming for movement. I sprinted across the frozen tundra, hearing it glide over snow behind me, faster than any human could. I dared not look back. Survival depended on forward motion, on exploiting the small opening I had. I reached the helicopter, fingers numb, muscles trembling. The pilot saw me collapse into the seat and shouted, but I barely registered the words. The engines roared to life, blades chopping the frigid air, snow spraying like shards of glass. I exhaled, a sound of relief mixed with terror. I had survived. But as we lifted into the sky, I dared a glance back. The ruins of the station were far below, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ice. And there it was, just beyond the edge of the clearing, eyes glinting in the faint sunlight, waiting. Not running, not hiding, simply watching, patient, intelligent, unbroken. I survived, yes. But the Tamir wilderness, the frozen expanse of ice and wind, remained its domain, and I knew, deep in my bones, that it had not finished. It would remember me, remember my scent, and one day it would return. Even now, the memory lingers. The faint click of claws on ice, the unnatural tilt of a shadowed head, the unspoken intelligence that felt almost human, but was far from it. I survived the Siberian tundra, but I left part of my soul there, in the ruins, under the watchful gaze of something that will always wait. The world knows I came back alone. It does not know what followed, and I am not sure I ever want to know. The helicopter hummed steadily, carrying me away from the frozen hell I had survived, yet the warmth inside felt hollow. I am Marek Orlov, and survival has never felt like a victory. Every muscle in my body ached, frostbitten and exhausted, but it was my mind that bore the heaviest wounds. Sleep has become impossible. Shadows in the corners of my room, noises in the wind, every creak in the floorboards, they all whisper that the Tamir wilderness never truly let me go. Petrov kept talking, asking about what I saw, what I encountered, but the words wouldn't form. How could I describe something that defied nature, that outthought me at every step, that adapted to my very strategies? To say creature felt like a simplification, an insult to its intelligence. What haunted me was its awareness, the fact that it knew I was fleeing yet allowed me to survive. Not mercy, no. This was something far worse. Observation, calculation, waiting. Back in the city, the world carried on as usual. Traffic, noise, the smell of burning fuel, it all felt alien. I tried to report the expedition, to document evidence, but what could I show? A snow-covered ruin, footprints that melted before cameras could capture them, shattered metal twisted by time and frost. The logs I found were corrupted, sensors inexplicably damaged. It was as if whatever had followed me had erased its traces, leaving only my memory, vivid and horrifying. Night is the hardest. The darkness here is not like the tundra, but it feels the same. I hear the faint click sometimes. Maybe just imagination, maybe not. A shadow moves too fast in my peripheral vision, and I freeze, heart hammering, every reflex trained by decades of combat. My training tells me it's impossible. But instinct, the part of me that survived in the snow, knows otherwise. I have dreams too, dreams of the frozen station, the endless wind, and the creature gliding across the snow, intelligent, patient, studying me, always just out of reach. Sometimes I wake to faint scratching on the window or the metallic tang of ice in the air, even here in the warmth of civilization. I tell myself it's paranoia. I tell myself it's post-traumatic stress, but deep down I know better. I survive, yes. I eat, I drink, I move through the world of humans. But a part of me remains in Siberia, among ruins and shadows, in a land where something watches, waits, and adapts. And I know this with absolute certainty. It remembers me. It remembers every tactic, every sound, every movement I made. And it will return. I will never go back to the Taimyr Peninsula. I cannot, but neither can I forget. It has become a part of me. The fear, the obsession, the awareness that survival is temporary and fragile. Every whisper of wind, every shadow flickering in the corner of my eye, every unexplained click in the distance, I feel it watching. And sometimes, when I am alone in the dead of night, I can hear it. Faint, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Click, click, click. I survived Siberia, but Siberia did not survive me. My name is Adrian Kovacs, and if I'm being honest, I thought nothing in this world could break me after 20 years of crawling through mud, deserts, and jungles, where men screamed and died around me. I thought I knew fear, but fear doesn't always wear a face or bleed when you cut it. Sometimes it waits where the cold has preserved everything, even secrets no one was meant to hear. That's what brought me here, to the forgotten station called Polyarny 13, a rusting complex of iron skeletons buried in snow far out in the Siberian tundra, the kind of place maps no longer mention. I was contracted by a defense firm, not officially military, not officially civilian, to assess whether the station could be reclaimed for Arctic testing operations, which was a polite way of saying, see if the place was still stable, habitable, and most importantly, if the stories of men losing their minds here were just Russian folklore. I stepped out of the Mi-8 helicopter and watched its rotor blades vanish into the gray. The silence that followed wasn't natural. Normally in the tundra, you'd still hear the endless hiss of wind, the crack of shifting ice. But here, there was only the groan of old steel, like the place itself was holding its breath. The cold cut through my layered gear like knives. My eyelashes froze together with every blink, and my breath carried a metallic taste, like rust and ozone. Even before I touched the buildings, my instincts, those drilled into me from Sarajevo to Kabul, told me I just walked into something wrong. Not enemy territory, not an ambush zone. Something worse. The station itself rose out of the permafrost like broken teeth. Collapsed hangars, skeletal radio towers leaning at impossible angles, and a central blockhouse sealed in ice. Every door had been welded shut decades ago. My assignment was simple. Get in, take readings, verify structural integrity, and camp for 72 hours to prove the site was safe. Easy on paper. In reality, 3 days alone here felt like stepping into the grave. I set up my bivouac in the shadow of the main tower, unpacked my survival instruments, and began my first survey. The air was thick, almost oily, and when I tapped my earpiece recorder, static hissed so loudly it made me flinch. My own voice echoed back a half-second too late, warped, like someone else was repeating me with a mouthful of water. I froze, staring into the tower's black windows. There was no one here. The last people stationed at Polyarny 13 had evacuated in the late 1980s. And yet, I could have sworn my own words didn't belong to me when they came back. That was the first unusual detail. I logged it in my field notebook, even though my pen scratched too loudly on paper. Out here, sound carried wrong. Too sharp, too close. As the gray light bled out of the sky, I boiled rations on a small stove and scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. No birds, no fox tracks, not even shifting snow. It was as though this station had cut itself out of the natural world entirely. Then came the second detail. While setting up my perimeter tripwire alarms, old habits die hard, I heard boots crunching snow behind me. Slow, deliberate, I pivoted, weapon up, only to find untouched powder stretching back 50 meters. No prints, no movement. But in the windless air, I still heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of someone walking in a circle around me, closing in. I told myself it was the old metal echoing, ice fracturing beneath the complex. But that lie sat poorly in my stomach. The third detail sealed it. When I crawled into my bivvy that first night, the kind of silence you could drown in pressed against my ears. I shut my eyes, forcing myself to sleep when I heard it. Adrian. Not shouted. Whispered. Just at the edge of hearing, like someone pressing their mouth against the ice and speaking through the ground itself. My chest tightened. My rifle was in my hands before I knew I'd grabbed it. Nobody should know my name here. And yet, somewhere in the frozen corridors of Polyarny 13, something had just called to me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay inside the bivvy sack, breath fogging the nylon ceiling, heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. Special Forces training had burned one principle into my marrow. Don't ignore anomalies. Small things kill. An out-of-place footprint, a shadow that doesn't match the light, a sound without a source. But this wasn't a war zone. No insurgents, no patrols, just ice, rust, and the carcass of an abandoned Soviet station. So how did something know my name? By 400 hours, I gave up on sleep. The cold bit at me even through insulated layers, my fingers stiff as wood when I forced them to grip the stove. Coffee tasted like iron shavings, bitter and grounding. I checked my instruments, barometer steady, Geiger counter faintly clicking in the background, nothing alarming, but the audio recorder showed spikes, as if there were bursts of sound too high or too low for me to hear. I logged it, but unease itched between my shoulder blades. It wasn't enemy fire or shrapnel this time, it was the feeling of being overheard. At first light, or what passed for it this far north, I approached the main blockhouse. Its concrete walls were half swallowed by ice, reinforced doors welded shut. The red paint of Soviet insignia still peeled across the front, faded but legible. Opasna, radioaktivna. Dangerous radioactive. I'd seen it before on derelict bases. Sometimes it was real, sometimes it was theater to keep scavengers away. My Geiger counter barely ticked. Radiation wasn't the problem here. I circled the structure, boots crunching. Each step echoed back wrong, arriving a fraction too soon, like my own sound had looped around me. I paused, listening. The air didn't just carry sound, it bent it, twisting it into shapes I didn't recognize. That's when I noticed the breaches. Not doors, but cracks where the ice had split concrete wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Jagged edges, rimmed with frost, dark as a throat inside. I hesitated. My job was to log structural access, not play hero. But leaving it unchecked gnawed at me. I pulled a chem light from my vest, cracked it, and tossed it in. The green glow slid down the corridor, lighting peeling walls, frost-coated wires, and, worse, a line of boot prints leading deeper inside. Old? Maybe. Except the frost around them hadn't reformed. They were fresh. Every instinct screamed at me to fall back, call in extraction, wait for daylight. But the helicopter wouldn't return for 72 hours, and command wanted proof I hadn't just sat on my ass in the cold. More than that, I couldn't stomach walking away from something like this. So I went in. The air changed instantly, thicker, almost humid despite the freezing temperature. My headlamp beam caught rusted steel doors, many pried open, others still locked. Icicles hung like knives from overhead pipes. The sound of dripping water tapped a steady rhythm. Then came the whisper. Not words at first, just a low murmur, like two people talking beyond a wall. My body froze, rifle tight against my shoulder, ears straining. I swept the beam around, empty corridor, peeling paint, frost cracking beneath my boots. The voices stopped. I forced myself forward, deeper into the complex. Each room was a snapshot of abandonment. Bunks frozen in time, desks piled with rotting paper, typewriters rusted solid. and always that sense of being watched. In one chamber, I found a row of lockers. One stood open, and carved inside the steel with something sharp were words in Russian. "They speak with our voices. Don't answer." I stepped back, bile rising in my throat. Something creaked behind me. A door I hadn't touched swung an inch open, hinges groaning like a living thing. I snapped my rifle up, sight trained. Nothing moved beyond the crack, only blackness. And then, clear as day, came the sound of boots running, sprinting down the corridor toward me. I braced, pulse hammering, finger on the trigger. But the hall stayed empty. The sound grew louder, pounding closer until it passed directly through me. My chest rattled with the force of it down, like a phantom platoon had just stormed past. And just like that, silence. I backed into the locker room, breath ragged. Training screamed at me. Fall back, regroup, establish perimeter. But there was no squad here, no fallback position. Just me and a station that sounded alive. When I finally staggered outside, the sky had turned gray-black again, twilight blending into endless night. Snowflakes fell in slow, deliberate spirals, as if gravity itself had thinned. I set another perimeter of tripwires and collapsed against the bivvy, shaking harder than the cold could justify. My brain wanted to write it off as stress, auditory hallucination, maybe even mild hypothermia. But I'd seen hallucinations before. Men in deserts swearing water was ahead. This was different. The sounds had weight. They moved the air, pressed against my skin. And one thing clung to me above all. The phantom footsteps had stopped at the locker room door, right where I stood. Not beyond me, not retreating. They stopped with me. That night, when I finally drifted into shallow, broken sleep, I dreamed of men in Soviet uniforms sitting upright in frozen bunks, mouths wide open, whispering in unison, and each whisper carried my name. When I woke, it was to the sound of my own voice. At first, I thought I'd spoken aloud in a dream, muttered something half-conscious in the bivvy sack, but then I realized I was hearing myself from outside. Clear, calm, the same tone I used in the field, barking orders, clipped and precise. "Adrian, move to the south wall." I froze, my throat locked, my lips hadn't moved. Training took over. I pulled free of the bivvy, rifle up, scanning. The tundra lay flat and endless around the outpost. My tripwire alarms sagged in the snow, unbroken. Nothing but iron skeletons and black windows. And then, a guy voice. "South wall, now." It came from inside the main blockhouse. Every rational thought screamed at me to hold position. My survival manual, the one I drilled into recruits, might as well have been tattooed on my brain. When in doubt, don't move. If the enemy knows your name, they know more than they should. But curiosity, or maybe arrogance, pushed me forward. I couldn't let something mimic me, use my own command voice against me. If I didn't confront it, it would own me. The breach in the concrete yawned like a wound, green chem lights still glowing faintly in the corridor beyond. I ducked inside, rifle leading, breath puffing in clouds. Silence. The air was thick, damp, carrying a faint copper tang, like blood evaporated on steel. I stepped past the lockers where I'd seen the warning scratched into metal. My boots squeaked against frost. Then I heard breathing. Slow. Measured. In rhythm with mine. I held my breath. The second set of lungs didn't stop. A shadow passed at the end of the corridor. My shadow. The shape matched me perfectly. Same height, same gear, rifle cradled in the same grip. My pulse jolted. I swung the headlamp beam forward, but the corridor was empty. No shadow. No man. That's when I realized the light itself was bending. My beam split across the walls as if refracting through glass, scattering silhouettes that looked too much like me. Something in this place was replaying me back at myself. Not just sound, not just voice, presence. I pressed deeper into the blockhouse, step by step, forcing myself to stay sharp. My mind kept tallying escape options, breach point behind me, fallback bivvy 20 meters outside, flares if I lost light, stay calm, stay alive. Then the whispers began again. Not Russian this time. English. Still here. You should not have come. We waited for you. Each phrase overlapped, voices layered like a chorus recorded on broken tape. Some sounded like me. Others like men I'd served with, men who were long dead. I gritted my teeth, forcing the panic down. Don't engage, don't answer. That's what the locker warning said. The hall opened into a control room, Slaith. Consoles rusted to skeletons, glass panels shattered, frost climbing every surface. My headlamp glinted off something on the floor, dog tags scattered in a pile. I crouched, fingers brushing metal. The names were all Cyrillic, except one. Kovacs, Adrian. I dropped them like they burned. My name shouldn't be here. No record of me existed in this place, unless something had placed it here, unless something new. That's when the metal door slammed behind me. I whipped around, rifle up. The door had been fused to ice when I passed it. Now it stood sealed, locking me in the control room. The sound reverberated through the chamber, a metallic boom that rattled my teeth. The whispers stopped. Then a voice spoke, clear, deep, inside the room with me. You will not leave. It wasn't mine. Not exactly, but close enough. Like an older version of me, scarred, hollow, stripped of all warmth. Something shifted in the dark corner of the room. My lamp beam caught it, half seen, half frozen in place. A figure crouched against the wall, draped in gear that looked exactly like mine. Same pack, same weapon, same patches. But the head was wrong. Too smooth, too pale. A face stretched like wax with no eyes, only a mouth. And that mouth opened wide, wide enough to crack, and from it came my voice. Adrian, sit down. My body jerked like a puppet string had been yanked. I almost obeyed, almost dropped to my knees right there, but instinct cut through. I fired. The muzzle flash lit the room in white. The rounds tore through frost and concrete, chipping steel, but the thing didn't fall. It melted into the wall itself, shadow sliding flat, my voice echoing off every surface. You can't kill what you are. I kicked back, slamming my shoulder into the sealed door, hard enough to feel bone bruise. The steel groaned, frost cracking. Once, twice, 3 times, until the ice shattered and the door gave. I stumbled into the hall, lungs burning, sprinting for the breach. The voices followed. Not whispers now. Shouts, commands, all in my tone. Cover left. Advance. Don't stop moving. Every order I'd ever given in combat hurled back at me, screamed from every corridor. Boots thundered overhead, phantom squads chasing me through the bones of the station. I dove through the breach into the open tundra, snow spraying around me. The voices cut off instantly, leaving only my ragged breath and the groan of wind. I collapsed against the ice, chest heaving. My rifle barrel smoked in the cold. The blockhouse loomed above, black windows gaping like sockets, silent once again. But as I forced myself back toward the bivvy, I couldn't shake the feeling I hadn't escaped, because the echo of one last command still buzzed in my skull, low and insistent. Adrian, come back inside. I spent the next hours pacing circles around my camp, rifle slung tight, nerves frayed to wire. No soldier lasts long in constant alert, but try telling my heartbeat that. Every crunch of my boots on snow felt like betrayal, loud, clumsy, easy to track. The station loomed behind me, blockhouse black against a horizon of gray-white. It had gone quiet again, too quiet. Silence isn't always safety. Sometimes it's the kill zone right before a sniper squeezes the trigger. I forced myself to eat, freeze-dried beef, chewy and tasteless. My hands shook so badly, I spilled most of the powder before it hit the boiling water. I kept glancing up at the structure, waiting for a shadow in the windows, a flicker of movement. Nothing. But I knew better. In every theater I'd served, the enemy tested you before they closed in. A probing fire, a false retreat, anything to study your reactions. That's what Polyarny 13 felt like now, as if something inside was learning me. Not just my habits, me. By late afternoon, or what passed for it this far north, I couldn't take the waiting. I rigged a flare to the breach, so if anything crossed the threshold, I'd see it. Then I set my recorder facing the blockhouse and spoke aloud, testing. My name is Adrian Kovacs, NATO Special Forces, retired. You called my name. Why? Wind pressed against the microphone, static hissed, and then a second later my voice repeated back, not delayed, not warped, perfectly mimicked. Why? Another beat, then again deeper. Why? I swallowed. What are you? Silence, then what are you? But the way it said it, toneless, curious, it wasn't parroting, it was asking. I cut the recorder and pocketed it. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and wait out the extraction, but a gnawing truth held me in place. If this thing had intelligence, retreat wouldn't save me. It had already mapped my voice, my body, my thoughts. Night came without ceremony, just a deepening gray until the horizon vanished and the tundra became one solid block of shadow. I forced myself into the bivvy, rifle cradled, tripwire alarms in place. That was when the singing began. Not words, tones. Low, droning notes like a choir humming from deep underground. The sound rolled through the permafrost, vibrating the ice beneath me, rattling my chest cavity. It wasn't coming from the blockhouse anymore. It was coming from everywhere. I clenched my teeth until they ached. My tripwire stayed still, alarms silent, but the song grew louder, overlapping itself, splitting into harmonies. And then one voice rose above the others. Mine. Adrian, you will answer. I bit down so hard I tasted blood. My training screamed, don't engage, don't answer. But fear twists discipline. When you hear your own voice command you, it takes everything not to obey. I ripped open the bivvy, flares spilling across the snow, my breath hot and ragged in the cold. The station loomed silent, windows dark. The song cut off like a knife, and then footsteps in my camp. Not one pair, a squad. Boots crunching in formation, circling me in the snow. I swung my rifle wildly, finger on the trigger. But the beam of my headlamp revealed nothing. No men, no shadows. Just snow crushed flat in patterns that hadn't been there seconds before. Fresh prints. They moved around me in precise arcs like soldiers drilling, each crunch in perfect rhythm. My throat closed. Show yourselves, I barked. Now! The footsteps stopped. Then, from directly behind me, inches from my ear, came my own voice. We are. I spun, firing on instinct. Rounds shattered into the night, snow exploding in white plumes. The recoil hammered my shoulder, my ears rang, but when the smoke cleared, the snow was untouched. The footprints were gone. Breath tore in and out of me. My magazine was half empty. I slammed another in, fingers clumsy, adrenaline shaking me raw. And then I realized the tripwire alarms had all gone dead. I rushed to the nearest one. The line had been cut clean, wire ends severed like by a blade, not broken by wind, not chewed by wildlife. Cut. The others, all the same. My entire perimeter dismantled without me hearing a damn thing. That was the first time true panic took me. In war, fear sharpens you. But this wasn't fear of men. It was fear of something that thought like me, moved like me, and wanted me to know I wasn't the hunter here. I staggered back toward the bivvy, only to stop cold. There were two of them now. 2 bivvy sacks, identical, both in the same spot where I'd pitched mine. One zipped shut, one open, as if waiting for me. My pulse hammered. I backed away, scanning. No footprints led to the second bivvy. It had just appeared. The flap rustled, slowly, deliberately. Inside, a figure shifted. My figure, face half hidden in shadow, headlamp cracked, chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with mine. Then it spoke. Adrian, rest. I stumbled backward, tripping in the snow. My rifle nearly slipped from frozen hands. The figure inside the duplicate bivvy tilted its head the way I do when I'm listening. And in that moment, I knew the truth. This wasn't mimicry anymore. It wasn't repeating me. It was replacing me. The duplicate bivvy sack swelled as the figure inside sat up. The nylon rippled, zipper teeth splitting just enough for pale hands to press through. Hands exactly like mine. Same scars on the knuckles. Same calluses from years of rifle grips. I aimed center mass, finger white on the trigger. Don't move, I hissed, though it felt ridiculous ordering myself. The thing didn't flinch. It tilted its head, mirroring my stance perfectly, rifle in its grip. Not a copy of my weapon, down to the scratched serial number on the receiver. Stand down, it said. My voice, my inflection, not just a parrot, a commander giving an order. My stomach nodded. In combat, hesitation kills. 2 men with guns, one pulls first, only one walks away. But staring down my own face, my own voice, I froze. Some deep animal part of me whispered, if you shoot him, you're shooting yourself. The double's headlamp flickered, beam washing over me. I caught the reflection in its eyes, black, bottomless, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. And yet the rest of the face was me. Jaw tight, lips bloodless from cold. What are you? I spat. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised its rifle, barrel lifting in sync with mine, movements precise, too precise. I shifted left, so did it. I lunged right, again, mirrored. It was anticipating me, reading me, or worse, being me. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I sidestepped. My duplicate matched me step for step, circling, a dance of predators, identical down to the breath clouds in the frozen air. Then it smiled. I don't smile in combat, not ever. But this thing did, teeth bared, grin too wide. My skin crawled, seeing it curve across my own face. That broke the spell. I squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash lit the night, thunder cracking across the tundra. My double fired in the same instant, round for round, the echo a sick harmony. Bullets tore snow into fountains between us. Pain seared across my arm. I dropped to a knee, gritting my teeth, blood hot against the cold. The double staggered in the same spot, clutching the same wound, as if my injury was its own. For a heartbeat, we froze, both panting, blood steaming. Then it dropped its rifle, not in surrender, but to rise from the bivy sack without breaking eye contact. It stood tall, shoulders squared, posture a mirror of mine, every detail perfect except those black eyes and that smile. "Adrian," it said, voice low, almost gentle, "you can't kill what you are." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. I remembered them from the control room, from the wall thing with the stretched mouth. Same cadence, same intent. This wasn't just an echo, it was an intelligence, stringing my fragments together into something that could hunt. I backed toward the breach in the blockhouse wall, boots slipping. My mind screamed for an angle, a tactic, something to break the symmetry. You can't fight yourself head on. You have to break pattern. I yanked a flare from my vest, struck it. Red light roared to life, hissing, smoke stinging my nose. I hurled it into the snow at the double's feet. The thing flinched, not much, but enough. Its eyes drank in the red light, skin rippling as if heat alone unsettled it. I seized the opening, sprinting for the nearest tower. The steel skeleton loomed overhead, rusted ladder leading into darkness. I climbed. Hands slipped on ice rungs, muscles screaming, blood dripping down my sleeve. Below, the double followed, not rushing, but deliberate, calm. It didn't need speed. It knew I had nowhere to run. Halfway up, I kicked at the ladder, boots hammering metal. Rust groaned. The ladder peeled from its bolts, shrieking as it gave way. My double dropped with it, crashing into the snow. For a moment, silence. My breath thundered in my ears, heart slamming against ribs. I thought I'd bought time. Then it rose again. No limp, no injury. Snow sliding from its gear as if gravity meant nothing. Its head tilted back, eyes catching me in the beam of its headlamp. That smile hadn't faded. "Adrian," it called. "You left us behind." The words weren't mine. Not a mimic this time. They carried weight, sorrow twisted into accusation. And beneath it, a dozen voices layered, soldiers speaking in chorus. Men I'd fought beside, men who never made it home. Heat drained from me despite the cold. My mind clawed through memory. Sarajevo, Fallujah, Kabul, faces I couldn't forget, voices shouting in the dark. And now they were here in this frozen graveyard wearing my skin. "Who are you?" My voice cracked. The answer came from everywhere at once, from the blockhouse, from the snow, from inside my skull. "We are the echoes, and you are already one of us." The tower shuddered, wind howling through broken steel. My hands slipped on ice, nearly pitching me backward into the dark. Below, my double spread its arms as if to catch me, grin wide, eyes black voids. And in that moment, staring down at myself, smiling up from the snow, I understood the truth. The danger here wasn't just mimicry. It wasn't hunting me to kill me. It was hunting me to replace me. I clung to the frozen tower, chest heaving, lungs burning in the thin air. My gloves were soaked with blood and ice melt, every grip a knife of pain. Below, the double waited, head cocked, arms spread wide as if the fall was inevitable. The storm picked up, wind howling across the tundra, snow slashed sideways, stinging my face, making the whole world a blur of white and shadow. The blockhouse loomed like a black monolith, its windows glowing faintly. No light source, just a dull phosphorescence like the building itself was alive. I forced myself to climb higher, ignoring the sting of torn muscles. At the top, the platform swayed in the wind, rust shrieking. From up here, the land looked endless, an ocean of frozen desert. No cover, no extraction for days, just me and the thing wearing my face. It hadn't moved. Still standing below, headlamp beam tilted toward me, smile fixed. Too patient, too calm, the way a sniper waits for a target to break cover. That patience was the most terrifying part. Whatever this was, it didn't fear time. It could wait forever. My mind raced through options. In training, they taught us. Survive the first contact, then change the battlefield. Right now, the battlefield was chosen by the enemy. Echoes, shadows, mimicry. I needed to shift it to something physical, tangible. Something I could fight on my terms. My eyes locked on the fuel cache at the base of the tower, old Soviet drums, half buried in snow. If they still had anything left inside, I could turn patience into fire. I descended fast, ignoring the way the metal tore skin from my palms. Halfway down, the double finally moved. Not running, not climbing, just stepping back, melting into the storm until its outline vanished in the snow. I hit the ground, boots sinking. The wind screamed louder, carrying whispers now, my whispers, fragments of words I didn't remember saying, commands, please, prayers. Cover me. Not here, not like this. God, don't let me die. The voices spun around me, a circle tightening, my gut clenched, nausea rising. I stumbled to the drums, ice cracking under my boots, fingers fumbling at the rusted lids. One shifted with a groan. I tipped it, thick, viscous liquid sloshed, fuel, stale but still potent. I doused the snow in a wide arc, red flare in my other hand. My breath steamed as I struck the cap, hiss of ignition sparking in the storm. The flare hissed and spat fire into the wind. Come on, I growled, teeth bared. Let's see you echo this. I hurled it into the fuel-soaked snow. The world erupted. Flame roared to life, ripping across the ice in a furious wave. The storm turned orange, shadows whipping and stretching in every direction. The heat slammed against my face, melting ice on my gear, smoke clawing at my throat. And in the firelight, I saw them. Not one double. Dozens, scores. All shapes of me, stepping from the snow, faces mine, gear mine, but wrong. Too thin, too wide, too many eyes, too many mouths. Their smiles glistened like cracked porcelain, and their voices rose together in perfect unison. Adrian, Adrian, Adrian. I staggered back, rifle up, finger jerking the trigger until the magazine ran dry. Rounds tore through fire and snow, echoing like thunder, but the shapes didn't fall. They walked through flame without burning, boots hissing as fuel clung to them like water. The fire had lit them, but it hadn't stopped them. I reloaded with shaking hands, slamming the mag home. My throat burned with smoke, lungs screaming, ears ringing from gunfire. My heartbeat drowned out thought, and then they stopped. Every double froze mid-step, heads snapping toward me in unison. Mouths opened. The sound that followed wasn't human. A low, guttural roar, layered 1,000 times, shaking the ice beneath my boots. The tower shuddered, metal screaming in sympathy. My stomach clenched as bile surged. The roar cut off, and every double vanished. Not faded. Not dissolved. One moment there, the next gone, leaving only charred snow and fire-eating fuel. I stood in the middle of it, panting, rifle shaking in my hands. The tundra stretched empty again. The storm pressed close, muffling everything. But I wasn't alone. From the blockhouse, a single figure stepped forward. Not rushing, not smiling, just walking. Its outline was mine, but taller, broader. Shadows clung to it like a cloak, twisting in ways that hurt my eyes to follow. Its voice carried over the crackle of fire, low and final. You cannot burn the echo. You are already ash. The storm died around us, wind falling flat. My ears rang with silence so sharp it carved. I tightened my grip on the rifle, heart slamming. Survival wasn't about firepower anymore. It was about refusing to let this thing finish the replacement it had started. And deep down, through terror and pain, I knew if I faltered now, if I so much as blinked, it wouldn't just take me. It would become me. The figure halted at the edge of the firelight, shadow wrapping its body like smoke. My shadow. But the way it stood, rigid, commanding, it reminded me of every moment I'd led men into gunfire. Except this wasn't leadership. This was possession. I forced myself to breathe steady, to think like a soldier. Fire hadn't worked. Bullets hadn't worked. If this thing thrived on imitation, then direct confrontation was suicide. The battlefield had to change. Unpredictability, that's the only edge left when you're mirrored. You can't outmatch yourself in strength or reflex, but you can do what the enemy doesn't expect. I knelt and slammed my rifle into the snow. The metal hissed against the frost. My double's head tilted, black eyes narrowing. It didn't follow. For the first time, it hesitated. Good. That meant it didn't know what came next. Not playing your game, I muttered, pulling the sidearm from my thigh holster. Instead of aiming at it, I fired into the sky. 1 shot, 2, 3. The gun cracked the silence, bullets tearing into nothing but gray cloud. The figure twitched. The air itself trembled with each shot, like the world didn't know how to echo nonsense. The thing's smile faltered, so I gave it more nonsense. I dropped the sidearm, drew my combat knife, and slashed my palm open. Blood welled hot, dripping onto the snow. My body screamed against the cold shock. The double flinched again, hand twitching toward its own, though no cut marred its skin. I pressed my palm to the snow, smearing red across white, a signal no mimic could predict. Pain tore through me, but adrenaline drowned it. My breathing slowed into a rhythm I'd used on night raids. Control fear. Own the pace. You copy, I said, voice low. But you can't improvise. The figure's head snapped toward me, eyes wide voids. Its voice boomed. Layered and broken, we are everything. It lunged forward, not walking this time, charging. Boots pounded snow, a blur of black and pale. I spun, not toward the blockhouse, not toward camp, but away into the tundra, wide, open, endless. My legs burned, wounds screaming, lungs tearing with icy air. But I didn't stop. The storm swallowed me. Wind clawed at my hood, snow slicing my cheeks raw. I ran blind, each step a gamble. Behind me the footsteps followed. Too many. 100 boots hammering in unison. I veered left suddenly, dropping to my belly, sliding across ice. The footsteps thundered past where I'd been seconds earlier, overshooting. I scrambled up, gasping, forcing my legs to move. Strategy clear now. Don't fight. Force it to chase. Force it to break rhythm. The tundra opened into a frozen ravine, jagged ice walls yawning downward. I slid down the slope, grabbing chunks of frost to keep balance. The air down here was stiller, sound muffled by the canyon walls. My breath echoed back strange, doubled. Boots crunched above me. Dozens of figures peered over the edge. My faces, stacked one over another, black eyes glistening. I pressed against the ice, forcing calm. Trapped? Maybe. But also in control of the terrain. I drew a flare, struck it. Red light painted the ravine like blood. The figures above hissed in unison, 1,000 mouths opening wide. The sound rattled shards of ice loose. Then the lead figure climbed down, not rushed, not clumsy, smooth, deliberate, like it had done this 1,000 times. My posture, my movements. I backed deeper into the ravine, flare hissing in one hand, knife slick with blood in the other. My boots slid on ice, heart thundering. The figure reached the floor. It was close now, close enough to see the details. The scar on my chin from a fight in Budapest, the bent strap on my vest. Even the faint tremor in my left hand I thought I'd hidden for years. But its mouth split wider than mine ever could. You cannot run from yourself, it whispered. I forced a grin, lips cracked with cold. Then maybe you can't either. I hurled the flare against the ice wall. Fire kissed frost, hissing steam rising. The crack widened with a shriek. A sheet of ice gave way, crashing down between us. The ravine shook, snow pluming into the air. When it cleared, the figure was on the other side of the collapse, blocked by jagged shards. Its head tilted, smile unbroken, voice threading through the gap. You bought moments, not escape. The chorus echoed overhead, hundreds of voices carrying the same phrase, rippling into the storm. I staggered back, chest heaving, blood dripping down my arm. I delayed it. Nothing more. But delay was survival, and survival was all I had left to barter. As I climbed deeper into the ravine, the voices followed me through the storm, louder than the wind, closer than my own heartbeat. The ravine narrowed the deeper I went, walls squeezing inward until I had to twist sideways to pass. My headlamp threw fractured light across ice that glittered like glass, every crack reflecting my face back at me. Staring. Some smiled, some didn't. The echoes followed. Not footsteps anymore. Breathing. Dozens of lungs inhaling and exhaling in perfect rhythm, filling the air with a hollow wind. I tried to block it out, but each breath seemed tethered to mine, like they were waiting for me to miss a beat so they could take over. My boots crunched against something that wasn't ice. I knelt, scraping frost away. Metal. Rusted Soviet issue. Beneath them, skulls. Rows of them piled in the blue shadows of the canyon floor. I froze, stomach lurching. Each skull had the jaw pried wide, teeth broken, as if forced to scream until the bone shattered, and carved into the walls above them in desperate hand scratches, words in Cyrillic, "Do not answer." I staggered back, almost slipping. The warning from the lockers, repeated here, etched by hands long gone. They'd heard it too. They'd been tested, like me, and they'd failed. The breathing swelled louder, pressing against my ears. Then came the voices. Not distant anymore. Not layered. One clear, one precise, right behind me. "Adrian, stop running." I spun, knife flashing in my hand, headlamp beam slicing through the dark. He stood there, not one of the warped doubles this time. Him. Me. Perfect down to the last detail. My height, my stance, my eyes, even the bloodied sleeve where my wound throbbed. The smile was gone. The face was calm, steady. It was like staring into a mirror I couldn't shatter. "You don't have to fight anymore," it said. My voice, my cadence, quiet, reasonable. "We're not your enemy. We're you. All the pieces you left behind." My chest heaved. "You're not me." It stepped closer, boots silent on ice. "Aren't we? Sarajevo, Kabul, the desert road in Fallujah. Every command you gave, every man who didn't come back. We remember what you try to forget." The ravine walls seemed to pulse, whispers bleeding through cracks in the ice, voices of the dead, layering names I'd buried. Corporal Juhas, Private Loring, Captain Reyes, names I hadn't spoken in years. Names that still haunted me at 0300 when the walls closed in. "Shut up," I growled, knife shaking in my grip, but the figure didn't stop. "You carry them, Adrian. We carry them too. Why fight us? Why not rest?" Something inside me cracked. Rage, grief, exhaustion, all the years I'd held tight to discipline came spilling loose. My throat tore with a shout as I lunged, knife flashing. Steel met flesh, or should have, but the blade slid through as if cutting smoke. My double didn't flinch. It caught my wrist, grip identical to mine, twisting until the knife clattered onto ice. The hand on my wrist was warm, too warm, like blood rushing too fast. "You can't kill what you are," it whispered, face inches from mine. I struggled, teeth gritted, but its strength was absolute. It wasn't overpowering me with muscle, it was holding me with inevitability. Like gravity, like death. It leaned closer, forehead pressing against mine. My own eyes stared back, pupils black voids swallowing everything. Its breath was my breath. Its heartbeat my heartbeat. "Just let go," it said, and for a heartbeat, I wanted to. The weight of years, of faces, of orders and regrets all pulling me down. Rest sounded almost merciful. But then my palm brushed the blood on my arm. Hot, real, mine. And that cut through the lie. I shoved with everything left, breaking its grip, staggering back against the ice. My lungs heaved, vision swimming. My double didn't pursue. It just stood, watching, as if amused. "You can't run forever," it called, voice echoing down the ravine. "But we'll run with you. Every step." The walls around me groaned, ice fracturing, skulls rattling as if the earth itself was shuddering. My headlamp flickered, shadows dancing into shapes that looked like soldiers lining the canyon, weapons raised, eyes black. The storm above howled louder, drowning everything. I bolted deeper, knife gone, rifle nearly empty, blood freezing on my sleeve. The ravine twisted downward like a throat swallowing me whole. Everywhere, voices whispered, mine, theirs, ours. And I knew. I wasn't descending alone. I was being led. The ravine funneled me downward until the walls closed overhead, sealing me into a tunnel of ice and rock. My headlamp struggled, beam flickering like a dying star. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened, damp, metallic, tinged with ozone like the moment before lightning. My boots crunched over ice, then stone, then something softer. I angled the lamp down and froze. The floor was carpeted with gear, packs, rifles, boots, all military issue, some Russian, some NATO, all frozen into the permafrost like artifacts in a museum. Dog tags tangled in clusters, rattling faintly when the wind found the cracks above. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a battlefield grave. This was collection. The tunnel widened abruptly into a cavern, so vast the walls vanished into black. The ceiling dripped stalactites of ice, each humming faintly with vibration. My lamp caught a shimmer in the center. It wasn't a structure. It wasn't natural either. It was a column of sound made visible. Shimmering air like heat on asphalt, pulsing in slow waves. Every breath I took synced with its rhythm. When I exhaled, it inhaled. When I blinked, the shimmer dimmed, and layered through it were faces. My face. Dozens, hundreds, twisting through the shimmer like trapped reflections in broken glass. Some younger, some older, some twisted beyond recognition, all whispering. Adrian, Adrian, Adrian. The chorus drilled into my skull until my knees buckled. I dropped to the ice, clutching my head, ears bleeding from the pressure. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They overlapped with other memories. Not mine. A Russian officer's last orders in 1986, a conscript freezing in a collapsed bunker, a medic screaming for a man already gone. The shimmer pulsed brighter. My double stepped from it, whole and solid, black eyes burning with hunger. This is what you left behind, it said. Every failure, every order that cost a life, every voice that called and was never answered. We are you, Adrian, and you belong here. My hand fumbled for the last flare on my vest, slick with blood. I struck it. Red light flared weakly, casting shadows across the cavern. The shimmer drank it in, faces writhing, voices rising. You can't fight us, the double hissed. The more you struggle, the more we grow. You are already echo. My chest heaved, lungs burning, mind splitting. It wasn't wrong. I was carrying them, all the ghosts, all the weight. I'd tried to bury them under discipline, under survival, but they'd never left me. They'd followed me here into this frozen tomb. The flare sputtered. And then I remembered something. An old survival lesson drilled into me long before combat. When the wilderness wants you dead, don't fight it head on. Outlast it. Outthink it. This thing fed on voices, on recognition, on acknowledgement. Every man who answered had been swallowed. So I forced myself to do the opposite. I pressed the flare against my wound, screaming as fire bit into flesh, cauterizing the gash. Pain blanked my thoughts, seared my mind white. For a moment I couldn't hear the whispers. For a moment, I was only pain. And in that silence I moved. I staggered to the packs frozen in the ice, yanked free an old Soviet grenade, metal corroded but fuse intact. My hands shook as I pulled the pin, let the spoon fly, and hurled it into the shimmer. The explosion shattered the cavern. Ice rained from above, thunder ripping through stone. The shimmer convulsed, faces screaming, voices splitting into static. My double shrieked, not in fear but fury, before collapsing back into the column of sound. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, the cavern began to fall. Cracks split the ice floor, black water roaring up from beneath. The shimmer bled into the cracks, voices echoing through every fracture, chasing me as I scrambled toward the tunnel. My lungs burned, legs screaming, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the chorus roared one last word, layered with every voice I'd ever known. Adrian. I burst into the ravine just as the cavern collapsed, ice groaning, skulls tumbling into the abyss. The ground heaved, throwing me face first into the snow. I clawed forward, half crawling, half dragging myself until the earth stilled. When I finally looked back, the tunnel was gone, buried. The shimmer sealed under tons of ice. I lay there for hours, or maybe minutes. Time had no shape anymore. My ears bled, my arm throbbed, my breath steamed weakly in the freezing air. The storm had passed, leaving only stillness, but the silence wasn't empty. In the hush of the tundra, I still heard it, faint, patient. My own voice, whispering from beneath the ice, "We'll wait, Adrian." I don't remember how I got back to the surface. One moment, I was lying in the ravine, half buried in snow, ears ringing with the collapse. The next, I was stumbling across the tundra, rifle slung uselessly, vision tunneling in and out. My body moved on autopilot, the way it had in combat when exhaustion turned men into machines. One foot, then the other. Don't stop, don't think, just survive. By the time I reached the bivvy, dawn was crawling over the horizon, a thin blue glow smeared across endless white. My gear was scattered, tripwires cut, alarms dead. The second bivvy sack was gone, vanished as though it had never been there. Only a depression in the snow remained, the shape of a man lying beside me all night. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. My water was half frozen. I broke the ice crust with bleeding knuckles, drank greedily, cold burning all the way down. Then I sat, staring at the black shape of the blockhouse in the distance. Silent. Still. Waiting. I thought about going back, planting more charges, burning the whole site until nothing but slag remained. But deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. Fire couldn't erase what lived here. Bombs couldn't kill echoes. The only reason I was still breathing was because I hadn't answered. Not fully. Not yet. I wrapped my wound with what was left of my med kit, hands clumsy, eyes scanning the horizon for any movement. Nothing. Just endless snow. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I closed my eyes too long, I'd wake up staring at myself again. The helicopter came on the third day. I heard it long before I saw it, rotors chopping the frozen air, beating against the silence. Relief should have crashed over me. Instead, dread twisted in my gut, because part of me expected to hear my own voice from the storm again. Don't go. Stay. Rest. The Mi-8 descended clumsily, blades whipping snow into a cyclone. The pilot gave a thumbs up through the frosted glass. I staggered forward, boots dragging, every muscle screaming. I climbed aboard without looking back. I couldn't. If I did, I might see someone, myself, standing in the snow, smiling, waiting. Inside, the warmth hit me like a hammer. The crew shouted over the noise, but I didn't answer. I strapped in, rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the floor. As the helicopter lifted, I risked one glance through the window. The outpost shrank beneath us. Blockhouse shrinking into a speck, towers swallowed by drifting snow. And in the blur of white, I swore I saw a figure standing on the roof. My figure. One hand raised in farewell. The pilot shouted something in Russian. I nodded, though I hadn't understood. My ears still rang with voices that weren't mine. Hours later, when the snowfields gave way to endless taiga, I leaned back, eyes burning, exhaustion pulling me under. For the first time in days, I slept, and I dreamed. I was back in the cavern. The shimmer pulsed, faces writhing, but this time they didn't whisper my name. They smiled, they waited. When I jolted awake, heart hammering, the crew asked if I was all right. I lied. Old habit, survival through denial. But I knew the truth. Polyarny 13 hadn't been destroyed. The echoes were still there, buried in ice, waiting for another soldier, another survivor, another name to call. And worst of all, when I touched the bandage on my arm, I swore I heard breathing beneath my skin. Not mine. Not yet. I am Adrian Kovac, and I walked out of the Siberian tundra alive, but sometimes in the silence before sleep, I still hear the echo. And one day I'm not sure I'll be able to tell which voice is mine anymore. I'm Alexei Morozov, a wildlife biologist by trade, and perhaps a fool for thinking I could wander the Siberian taiga alone and unscathed. My colleagues, well, the few I trust, called me reckless for volunteering to study wolves in the upper Chulim Basin. But I have a fascination for the uncharted, for life that flinches from human eyes yet thrives in ways we cannot measure. This forest, with its frozen moss, jagged cliffs, and rivers that roar through ice-choked valleys, was my laboratory, and maybe my prison. From the moment I set foot on the frost-hardened earth, I felt the weight of isolation. The sun barely touched the ground. A silver-gray mist lingered among the trees like a cautious observer. Each step in the snow crunched sharply, echoing through the silence, only to be absorbed by the dense forest behind me. The smell of damp pine and decaying leaves filled my nostrils, a pungent perfume of life and rot intertwined. My fingers were numb, and my breath puffed in white clouds that dissipated quickly in the still air. It should have been peaceful. Wolves are fascinating, but nothing about this place felt normal. On my second night, While I huddled in my small canvas tent, the faint sound of footsteps in the snow outside made my stomach tighten. At first, I blamed my imagination, or perhaps the wind. But when the steps paused and then retreated with precise timing to avoid my tent, a prickle of unease ran along my spine. Wolves do not tread like humans, and humans rarely walk through knee-deep snow at these temperatures without calling out. The following morning, I discovered tracks, human, indistinct, partially erased by frost. But there was something wrong. The stride was too long, the steps irregular, and one print seemed to merge unnaturally into the snow, as if the ground itself had moved beneath it. I felt a flicker of rational fear, but I reminded myself, I am trained for this. Observation is my weapon, patience my ally. Still, I could not shake the feeling of being watched, as though the forest itself had eyes. I set off at first light, rifle slung across my back, notebook and camera in my pack. The wolves were elusive, moving silently along ridges and frozen rivers, but I caught glimpses of them, ghostly shapes with yellow eyes reflecting the sparse sunlight. And yet I sensed another presence, one that mirrored my own patterns, avoiding detection yet following my every move. By the third day, the encounters grew stranger. I found small, precise imitations of my camp, broken twigs arranged in the pattern of my tent's support poles, shallow depressions in the snow shaped like footprints I had made hours earlier. My logical mind argued perhaps another researcher, perhaps a trapper. But nothing in the taiga is so careless. Whoever or whatever was here was waiting, studying me, learning my habits. That evening, the forest air thickened with an unnatural silence. The wind stilled, and even the creaking of the ancient pines seemed muted. I had just prepared my stove for a meager dinner when I heard it. A low whistle, almost like my own voice, carried across the clearing. "Alexei," it called, soft and deliberate. My pulse spiked. I spun toward the sound, rifle raised, but the mist offered nothing but empty space. I told myself it was a trick of the wind, but deep down I knew it was not. Wolves do not call your name. Wolves do not mimic the coughs, groans, and soft mutterings of a man. And yet the sound had come from the very heart of the forest, moving closer with the subtlety of a shadow. I retreated into my tent, heart hammering. Sleep was impossible. Every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind across the snow was amplified into a scream of warning. I thought of the Shvidki, the legends whispered by the few locals I had managed to contact. They spoke of a predator that was not merely flesh and bone, but something older, something clever and patient, that could walk like a man, call like a man, and disappear into the forest without a trace. I had dismissed their tales as superstition. Now, under the cold gray canopy of these ancient trees, I wondered if they had been warning me or simply recounting truths they could not prove. The next morning, I awoke to find the snow around my tent disturbed in a pattern that made my stomach twist. It wasn't random. Someone or something had moved deliberately, circling my camp in arcs that seemed too measured to be accidental. I knelt, brushing snow from the tracks, and realized that some of the prints were impossibly large, others too small, and a few seemed to shift in width as if the creature could alter its own gait. My rational mind struggled, insisting these were natural anomalies, maybe old tracks merged with new. But my gut screamed otherwise. I packed my things quickly, my hands trembling slightly, and began following a ridge where I had spotted wolves the day before. The cold bit at my fingers and ears, but I barely noticed. Every sense was alert. The forest was alive in a way that felt predatory. Even the birds were silent, and the distant river, usually roaring and white with ice, seemed to have slowed to a muted murmur, as if holding its breath. Hours passed, the light dimming beneath the thick canopy. I stopped at a small clearing where the ground was littered with frost-covered pine needles. My breath came out in ragged puffs, and for the first time a shiver ran deeper than cold, something primal. I crouched and examined paw prints in the snow, thinking they were wolf tracks, until I saw them change abruptly. Halfway through, a print stretched unnaturally, like a foot elongating mid-step. Then it stopped, paused, and resumed, perfectly aligned with the tracks I had left this morning. I froze. This was no wolf. I raised my rifle, scanning the tree line. The forest seemed to lean closer, had branches bending toward me, the mist thickening into ghostly columns. Then I heard it, a rustle behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps mimicking my own. My heart hammered as I spun, rifle up. The snow beneath my feet was unbroken. The footsteps stopped, a whisper floated from the trees, my own voice repeating the words I had just muttered under my breath. Focus. Keep moving. Check the ridge. I stumbled back, my pulse deafening in my ears. The rational part of me, the trained biologist, the man used to dealing with wild animals, insisted. It's clever, but it's still flesh and blood. It has limits. It cannot vanish entirely. And yet the sense of being watched intensified, pressing against my back, my neck, the very tips of my ears. I began moving again, cautiously, circling the clearing, listening for anything out of place. Every snap of a branch, every crunch of snow underfoot seemed amplified, as if the forest itself were mocking me. By late afternoon, fatigue had settled into my bones. The ridge I was tracking leveled into a narrow valley, dark and oppressive. Shadows pooled beneath the gnarled pines, and the temperature dropped suddenly. My breaths came fast and shallow, fogging the lenses of my binoculars. I paused near a cluster of frozen bogs, the smell of damp decay rising from the ice. And then I saw it, a figure standing among the trees, half shrouded in mist. At first I thought it was a hunter or a fellow researcher, but its stance, it was too deliberate, too perfectly still. I raised my rifle. "Who's there?" I called, voice tight. No reply, only the echo of my own words bouncing back. Then it moved, a slow step forward, breaking twigs in a pattern that seemed synchronized with my own heartbeat. The figure tilted its head, an almost human gesture, but its movements were just slightly wrong, a fraction too fluid, too silent for a man. My mind raced. Schvidki. All the legends, the warnings, every vague story from the locals coalesced into one terrifying certainty. This was it. Instinct took over. I backed toward a thick copse of trees, scanning for escape routes. The creature mimicked my every action, always just at the edge of vision, never fully revealing itself. I could feel its intelligence probing me, testing my reactions. I tried to remain calm, taking notes in my mind. Pattern recognition, observing behavior. But observation alone would not save me if it decided to strike. Night fell quickly, the forest swallowing the last remnants of light. I found a hollowed tree to shelter in, barricading myself with fallen branches. My rifle rested across my knees, but I knew it was a poor defense. The Schvidki, whatever it was, had patience. It was smarter than any predator I had ever studied. And as I huddled, shivering in the dark, I heard the first deliberate mimicry of my own steps, circling, pacing, faintly crunching in the snow, always just beyond my perception. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt fluid, warped. The forest seemed alive, pressing in. And then, faintly, I heard something I will never forget. A soft, almost affectionate whisper in my own voice, repeating a phrase I had muttered days before when alone. "Why are you here, Alexei?" I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, yet rooted by the impossible reality of the sound. I realized in a sinking moment that this thing didn't merely hunt. It studied, learned, adapted. I could not outsmart it without improvisation. I spent the rest of the night devising traps, not to kill, but to distract. Small pitfalls, snares, noisemakers. Anything to buy a window of opportunity. At dawn, I executed my plan, leaving one trail deliberately open while I doubled back along a hidden path. The forest seemed to resist me, the shadows curling as if aware of my maneuver. I kept moving, silent, heart hammering. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. By midday, exhausted, my body on the edge of collapse, I stumbled onto a frozen riverbank I had scouted days earlier. The river's surface glinted with ice, offering a potential route to escape. I crossed carefully, the thin ice groaning beneath me. Behind me, in the mist, I thought I saw a shape pause at the tree line, tall, impossibly still, watching. And then it vanished, leaving only the echo of a voice that sounded exactly like mine, whispering through the trees. "You can't leave, Alexei. I made it across. For now I am alive, but I know the forest has not released me. The Shvidki remains. Somewhere. Patient. Watching. Learning. Waiting. And I cannot stop thinking. It knows my habits, my patterns, perhaps even my fears better than I do. The forest is no longer my laboratory. It is a predator's playground. The frozen river was my only path forward, but each step across the fragile ice felt like walking a tightrope over oblivion. My muscles burned from exhaustion, every nerve on high alert. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those impossible footprints tracing my own inch by inch. But the river seemed empty, silent, save for the occasional snap of ice under my feet. I allowed myself a brief flicker of hope. Perhaps the creature had abandoned the chase. Perhaps I had outsmarted it, but instinct and experience warned me. Predators this intelligent do not give up so easily. By mid-afternoon, the river narrowed, bending around a cluster of jagged rocks. I slowed, careful to avoid cracking the ice. That's when I saw it. Not a shadow this time, not a whisper, but a figure emerging from the fog. Tall, almost humanoid, yet with limbs that seemed too long, too fluid. Its head tilted unnaturally, its eyes, if they were eyes, glimmered like dark pools reflecting a frozen sky. And it moved with terrifying precision, stepping exactly where I would have expected, anticipating my every move. I froze. My rifle trembled in my hands. I could have fired, but I knew it would do nothing. The bullet might hurt flesh, but it would not stop intelligence that had already studied my habits, my weaknesses. It made a sound then, a low, guttural mimic of my own voice. Alexei, why do you run? I wanted to scream, to run blindly into the forest, but my training kicked in. Observation first, action second. I scanned for patterns, anything to exploit. The Shvidki was calculating, patient. It wasn't just stalking me. It was learning, adapting, shaping the hunt like a predator shaping its prey. I remembered the small pitfall I had left along the riverbank hours earlier, a crude trap meant to distract. If I could lure it, just for a moment, I might create an opening. I stomped deliberately on the snow near the trap, then sprinted along a concealed path, heart hammering. The creature hesitated, as if puzzled by the change in my movements, then shifted its stride and followed. The trap worked partially. The Shvidki stepped into the pitfall, slipping awkwardly. I didn't stop to look. I pressed forward, adrenaline fueling my exhaustion. My breath came in sharp, stinging gasps, my legs threatening to buckle beneath me. The riverbank gave way to a thicket of dense, frozen pines. I pushed through, branches clawing at my jacket, snow weighing down my pack. I dared not look back. But then I heard it. A soft, deliberate step behind me, echoing the rhythm of my own footfalls. I spun, rifle up, but the fog was thick and the creature was already gone, or perhaps it had never been there. The mind games were worse than the physical threat. It knew I would hesitate, that fear would slow me, and it used that hesitation as a weapon. Hours blurred. I trudged through the forest, following the river as it twisted through the valley. The ice beneath my boots began to crack in places, forcing me onto the slippery, snow-laden rocks. Exhaustion clawed at my body, hunger gnawed at my stomach, and still the Shvidki was there, somewhere, always just out of sight, teaching me a lesson in terror and patience. As night fell again, I reached a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. Moonlight glinted off frozen cliffs, casting long, distorted shadows across the valley floor. And there it was, not hiding, not imitating, but waiting. Its form was now clearer, taller than any man, hunched slightly, limbs fluid and unnatural. It didn't move forward, it didn't retreat. It simply watched, tilting its head as if curious, amused by my persistence. I realized then that there would be no clean victory. No confrontation would end this. My survival depended on outlasting it, exploiting its patience, and using the terrain to my advantage. I found a fallen tree spanning a narrow chasm and crossed it with the careful precision born of desperation. The Shvidki did not follow immediately. It seemed to test me, letting me stretch the distance before continuing its silent pursuit. By dawn, I stumbled onto a narrow logging trail I had scouted earlier, one that led out of the forest and toward a distant ranger station. My body was bruised, frostbitten, every muscle screaming, but I moved as fast as I could without collapsing. I dared not stop, dared not rest. Behind me, the forest was silent again. The Schvidki had vanished, or was merely waiting, patient as stone, hidden in the fog. When I finally reached the station, human voices and warm light greeted me like salvation. I collapsed in the doorway, shivering, muttering incoherently. The rangers looked at me with suspicion, then concern. I tried to explain, to describe the creature, the whispers, the mimicry, but words failed me. They shook their heads, attributing my story to hypothermia and exhaustion. I know what I saw, I know what followed me. The Schvidki did not leave with me. Somewhere in the fog-choked pines and frozen valleys, it waits. It remembers me, my habits, the rhythm of my breathing, the timing of my steps, and if I ever return, I know it will be ready. For now, I live. I survived. But the forest is still alive, patient, and the predator within it is undiminished. And I cannot forget the echo of my own voice whispering through the mist. You can't leave, Alexei. The story ends here, not with the creature's demise, not with my triumph, but with the chilling certainty that some predators are not defeated by bullets, logic, or courage. They endure, they adapt, and they wait. My name is Elena Varga, and I've spent most of my life cataloging what the world would rather forget. Creatures that dwell in the corners of maps, places where roads dissolve into mud and silence. I am a field biologist, though more often than not, people just call me reckless. I prefer to think of it as persistence. My work focuses on species that resist domestication, that live in conditions so inhospitable most researchers give up long before they ever set foot in the field. That is how I found myself here, in the Norskog marshlands, a swath of swamp tucked deep into the northern forests of Europe, where fog curls like smoke and the land breathes with rot. A month ago, locals reported sightings of an unfamiliar amphibian, one larger than any known frog or salamander, with a throat that glowed faintly in the dark. A curiosity, perhaps. But when rumors followed of missing hikers, 3 in as many weeks, I couldn't resist. My colleagues dismissed it as folklore, but I have learned that myths are usually camouflage for something stranger, and often something real. The moment I stepped from the boat onto the wooden dock at the swamp's edge, the air pressed against me like a damp cloth. Sulfur and decay clung to the back of my throat, and every breath tasted faintly metallic, like rust. The marsh sang with insects I couldn't see, droning, shrill, a chorus that rose and fell as though the land itself had a pulse. The boards beneath me sagged, and when I shifted my pack on my shoulders, I felt the give of wet soil through my boots. I remember thinking, this place does not want me here. The camp I established was little more than a tent wedged between blackened reeds and a portable field lab I assembled on a folding table. I had supplies for 2 weeks, satellite equipment, and enough stubbornness to last longer if I had to. The first night, I logged water temperatures, collected moss samples, and watched how the mist thickened after sunset until it became a solid wall of gray. No stars, no horizon, only the constant smell of stagnant water. By the second night, I noticed something wrong. It was the sounds. I had grown used to the insect drone, the occasional bullfrog groan, and the rustle of unseen things sliding into water. But around midnight, everything stilled. The marsh doesn't grow quiet. It isn't supposed to. Yet the silence was total, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel indecently loud. And then came the first imitation. I heard a voice. It was faint, broken, as if carried from far away through the fog. A man's voice, calling a name I couldn't quite make out. I froze, head cocked, straining against the silence. It came again, closer this time, but distorted, as if the air itself bent it. My first thought was absurdly practical, maybe a lost hiker, but the rational part of me whispered that no one sane wandered here at night. And the voice, it didn't sound right. Each syllable dragged too long, stretched as though the speaker had never quite mastered the rhythm of speech. I told myself it was just the wind through the reeds. Still, I slept poorly, if at all, my ears tuned to every shift in the dark. On the third morning, I found footprints. They were large, webbed impressions sunk deep into the mud along the bank near my camp. Not human. Not quite amphibian either. Something between. The prints were fresh, the edges still glossy with seeped water. Whatever had left them circled the perimeter of my tent before vanishing into the reeds. I should have reported it immediately, logged the evidence, maybe even packed my equipment and left. Instead, curiosity anchored me. My profession demands a kind of arrogance, the belief that you can walk into hostile ecosystems and survive, that the unknown can be reduced to data points and Latin names. So I followed the tracks, recorder in hand, humidity clinging like a fever to my skin. The swamp deepened as I pressed forward. Pools of water spread like ink blots, reflecting nothing but mist. Branches sagged low, heavy with moss, and somewhere beneath the surface things moved, displacing ripples that spread toward me before fading into stillness. The further I went, the more oppressive the air became. Sweat gathered on my spine, cold despite the chill, and then there it was. The glow. Faint at first, like a candle held under water. A throbbing pulse of greenish light hovering between the reeds some 50 meters ahead. My breath caught. I reached for my camera, snapped a blurred image through the fog. The light flickered once, then shifted sideways, swift, purposeful, as though it had seen me and decided to vanish. That night I recorded my findings, my voice low, trembling though I wouldn't admit it. I described the prints, the mimicry, the phosphorescent glow. And still, when darkness spread across the swamp, I stayed awake listening. At 2 a.m. the voice came again. This time, it wasn't a stranger's. It was my father's. "Elena, come here." The words dragged through the fog, broken, unnatural, but unmistakable in tone. My father has been dead for 7 years. I sat frozen in my tent, flashlight trembling in my hand. The voice repeated louder, closer, each syllable cracking like ice. My stomach lurched as I realized it was coming from the water's edge, no more than 20 paces away. Against all reason, I unzipped the tent flap and shone the light into the mist. Nothing. Only rippling water, reeds shifting as though brushed by unseen hands. But just before I shut the light off, I saw them. Eyes. Low to the ground, glistening, unblinking, set too wide apart to belong to a man. They reflected the beam, not with the red flare of mammals, but with a green, glassy luminescence, like the swamp itself was staring back. I jerked the zipper closed, heart pounding so hard my chest ached. The voice called again, softer now, as if disappointed. Then silence returned. I didn't sleep. By dawn, my body ached from hours spent rigid and sleepless, every nerve still alert to the memory of those eyes. The swamp had returned to its noisy self, gnats whining, unseen frogs croaking in lazy rhythm, water plopping as things surfaced and slipped away again. It might have comforted me if the sound hadn't felt like a performance, like the swamp was pretending all was well. I packed my notes from the night before, forcing myself to document everything clearly. 2:07 a.m. Subject mimicked deceased relative's voice. Eye reflection, green bioluminescence, low set, wide spacing, suggestive of non-mammalian predator. My voice wavered on the recording, and I hated how much fear leaked into my words. Scientists aren't supposed to sound like prey. Still, I told myself, if I can observe it, I can understand it. If I can understand it, I can survive it. I avoided the water's edge that morning. The memory of seeing eyes so close gnawed at me, and the damp reeds where I'd spotted them now seemed like teeth waiting to close. Instead, I stayed near camp, checking the perimeter. That's when I noticed something stranger still. The footprints were back. They circled not only my tent this time, but my entire camp, around the lab table, near the fire pit, even behind the equipment crates. And they weren't single impressions. There were dozens, layered over one another, as though the creature had paced for hours while I lay awake inside, too afraid to move. The air thickened in my lungs. Something about the prints told me it hadn't simply wandered. It had been waiting, studying me. I should have radioed for extraction then and there, but every instinct of mine had always tilted towards stubbornness. Fear makes people flee. Obsession roots me deeper. I told myself it was data, that I needed one clear observation before leaving. But underneath that rationalization was something uglier, a need to prove I wasn't afraid. That evening, I set a trap. Not to catch it, I doubted I could, but to confirm its presence. Using rope, a motion sensor, and a camera, I positioned equipment near the prints along the bank. I smeared fish oil on the mud, hoping the scent might draw it out. Then I retreated to my tent, feigning calm, though my pulse throbbed behind my eyes. Midnight came. The swamp grew quiet again, as if a great hand had pressed mute. Then the voice returned. Elena. It was softer this time, almost coaxing. It shifted in pitch, sliding from my father's tone to something younger, higher, uncertain. A child's voice. My breath caught, and I realized with a sick twist it was imitating me, my own voice, speaking back at me from the reeds. Come here, please. The words dragged, warped, but the inflection was unmistakable. My throat dried. It knew me. I gripped the flashlight in one hand, a flare in the other. If it came close, I would burn the night apart. But then the motion sensor tripped, a faint click followed by the blinking of a red light. I dared a glance at the monitor, my fingers trembling. Movement. The camera showed only mist at first, then reeds bowing slowly outward as if parted by invisible hands. And then, there it was. A form hunched low, skin slick and dark as oil. Its limbs were too long, elbows bending strangely, webbed hands dragging grooves in the mud. And its head, oh God, it was wide, flat, with a mouth that opened too far, lined not with teeth but ridges that gleamed like cartilage. As it leaned closer to the fish oil, its throat swelled and pulsed with that eerie green glow I had seen before, casting sick light across its features. My hand jerked against the flare cap, and for a moment I nearly struck it. But the image held me still, fascination and dread braided tight in my chest. This was no myth, no folklore. It was real. Then it turned, not toward the fish oil, not toward the camera, toward my tent. The lens fogged as it exhaled, mist curling across the feed, and I realized it knew. It had known from the beginning. The trap was never mine, it was its. I dropped the monitor, heart hammering, and scrambled for the flare. A sound rose from outside, low and guttural at first before unraveling into words, Elena, inside. The mimicry was clearer now, closer to human, though still not perfect, each syllable wet, gurgled, wrong. The air in my tent tightened. Every instinct screamed to stay silent, but my hand brushed against the zipper, and the faint metallic rasp betrayed me. Silence. Then water splashed, deliberate, just beyond the canvas wall. Something dragged along the tent's surface, long fingers, tracing the outline of my head. I bit down hard on my sleeve to keep from crying out. Minutes passed. My muscles shook from tension, and then, as abruptly as it had come, the sound retreated. Reeds rustled, water lapped, and the swamp's drone slowly returned as though nothing had happened. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. When light finally bled gray through the fog, I stumbled out to check the camera. The lens was cracked. The casing was slick with slime. Whatever intelligence the thing carried, it understood technology well enough to dismantle it. I should have felt defeated, but instead I felt hunted. Not like a researcher, not like a scientist, prey. The strangest part came when I examined the ground near the camera. There were footprints, yes, but alongside them something else. Deep grooves that ran parallel as though it had dragged a second set of limbs or, not claws, tools. The realization gnawed at me. This wasn't an animal, not fully. It watched, it learned, it imitated. And now it knew my voice. That night, as dusk folded into mist, I resolved to leave. My pride had kept me here, but survival whispered louder now. I packed what I could, stashed the samples, and calculated the route back to the boat. A 3-hour trek if the swamp didn't swallow me first. But even as I prepared, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me. Every shift in the fog, every ripple on the water's surface felt deliberate, like it was waiting, patient, curious, certain I would have no choice but to pass through its territory to escape. And I wondered, with a shiver that rattled my bones, what if it wanted me to leave? What if letting me go was just another part of the game? I left at dawn when the fog thinned just enough to see 3 or 4 meters ahead. My pack was lighter, most of my equipment abandoned, samples sealed in watertight tubes stuffed into my jacket. The satellite radio hung at my side, its weight suddenly small compared to the weight of being alone out here. Every step squelched in the mud, loud as a shout in the silence. The marsh felt different now. No longer just inhospitable, it was hostile, as though every drooping branch and stagnant pool leaned closer to observe me. I kept scanning the mist for movement, for that faint green glow. But the fog played tricks. Shadows stretched, reeds bent, ripples formed without sound. My nerves buzzed raw, every sense straining. I whispered to myself, 3 hours, just 3 hours to the boat. My boots sank with each step, mud clutching like hands. The air stank of sulfur and brine, and the mist clung to my eyelashes until the world was a smear of gray. An hour in, I heard the first splash. I froze. The sound came from behind me, deliberate, heavy, too large for a frog or heron. I turned slowly, flashlight raised, but the mist revealed nothing. Then came a second splash, to my left this time, followed by another, closer. My chest constricted. It wasn't following me, it was circling. I forced myself to keep moving, faster now, mud sucking at my boots with greedy pops. My breath rasped, too loud. And then, faint but clear, a voice seeped through the fog. This way, Elena, this way. It was my own voice, pitched just above a whisper, bouncing from the reeds ahead. My stomach turned. It wasn't chasing me blindly, it was leading me, hurting me. I yanked the flare from my belt, thumb trembling on the cap. My training as a scientist said observe, document, survive through caution. But my body, every primitive animal part of me, screamed to fight fire with fire. When the next splash came, closer than before, I struck the flare. The hiss was deafening, the sudden eruption of red light tearing open the mist. For a moment, I saw nothing but smoke. Then something moved. Fast, low to the ground, slipping into the water with unnatural grace. I caught only fragments, slick skin, a jaw that opened too wide, the gleam of that glowing throat pulsing like a lantern beneath the surface. The swamp came alive. Water churned around me, though nothing broke the surface. Reeds whipped as if brushed by invisible limbs. I spun in circles, flare raised high, breath ragged. The light turned the fog into a red curtain, and I realized too late how blind it made me beyond its glow. Something struck the ground behind me, hard. I whipped around and my heart stopped. It was there. Tall now, no longer hunched, its limbs splayed impossibly wide, webbed hands pressing into the mud. Its eyes reflected the flare's red with a sickly green sheen, unblinking, unhuman. The glow in its throat swelled and dimmed with each wet, rasping breath. And then it spoke. Elena, don't run. The words gurgled, dragged through water, but the cadence was clearer than ever. It was learning. Perfecting. I staggered back, flare shaking in my grip. Stay away, I shouted, though my voice cracked thin. It tilted its head, throat pulsing brighter, and mimicked me exactly. Stay away. The tone identical, but wrong somehow, like hearing a recording warped by static. Adrenaline ripped through me. I hurled the flare at its chest. Sparks exploded across its slick skin, and it reeled with a guttural screech, retreating into the water. Steam hissed where fire met slime. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd won. Then the water boiled. It surged upward, reeds bending violently as though something enormous moved beneath the surface. I ran. I didn't care about direction anymore, only distance. My boots hammered mud, slipped, caught again. Behind me, the swamp churned like a living thing, splashes slamming in rhythm with my racing steps. The fog thickened, swallowing the path, and I crashed through waist-high reeds until my lungs burned. When I finally stopped, doubled over, gasping, the swamp was quiet again, too quiet. The flare was gone. My flashlight sputtered weakly, battery drained from overuse, the silence pressed in, suffocating. I turned in slow circles, disoriented, no markers, no landmarks, only endless gray. My chest tightened as realization settled. I had no idea if I was closer to the boat or deeper in its territory. Then I heard it. Breathing, not mine. Low, wet, steady, just behind me. I turned slowly, heart hammering, and froze. Through the mist, half submerged in the water, it watched me. Not attacking, just watching. Its throat pulsed with that green glow, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. My flashlight beam quivered across its face, catching those eyes, wide, glassy, patient. It wasn't rushing me. It didn't need to. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, landing hard in the mud. The cold sucked through my clothes, but I scrambled up, shaking, keeping the light fixed on it. My voice cracked when I whispered, "Why? Why me?" The thing blinked once, and then in perfect mimicry of my father's voice, it said, "Because you came." My blood iced. Every rational thought collapsed. It hadn't chosen me. I had chosen it. By stepping into this swamp, by staying when I should have fled, I had made myself prey. Before I could move, it slipped under the water, vanishing without a ripple. The reeds swayed once, then stilled. The silence returned. I stood shaking, mud dripping from my hands, breath clawing out of my throat. The realization settled heavier than the swamp air. It wasn't just hunting me. It was studying me, shaping itself around my fears. And it had no reason to stop. I don't remember how long I stood there, shaking, flashlight beam trembling against the reeds. Minutes? Hours? Time felt broken, suspended in the fog. My pulse was the only rhythm left, hammering hard enough to hurt. I wanted to run, but every direction was swamp, every path just more mud and water and fog. The thing had stripped me of bearings, just as surely as it had stripped me of courage. But survival is a stubborn reflex. Even in fear, the body claws for life. I forced myself to move, whispering each step like a mantra, forward, forward, forward. The mud dragged at me, sucking me down to my ankles. My breath fogged the air, each inhale wet and sour. Somewhere far off, a bird cried once, sharp and lonely, then fell silent again. I clung to the sound as a sign I wasn't yet swallowed whole by this place. An hour passed. Maybe more. My legs burned, my throat was raw. Then, through a thinning veil of mist, I saw it. The outline of the dock. My dock. Weather-worn planks jutting out into still water, the faint silhouette of the boat tethered at its end. My chest lurched with relief so fierce it felt like pain. I staggered toward it, hacked faster, boots squelching. The closer I came, the clearer the boat became, rope tugging gently with the current. I nearly laughed, nearly collapsed from the flood of hope. And then I saw the footprints. Wet, fresh, pressed deep into the mud of the dock. The same webbed impressions I had seen circling my camp, leading straight to the boat. I stopped dead. My relief curdled into dread. The dock groaned faintly as something shifted at its end, just out of sight in the mist. My flashlight flickered, and I banged it against my palm, desperate to keep the beam alive. A splash echoed from beneath the dock, then another, closer, deliberate. Elena. The voice slithered out of the fog, softer now, coaxing. Not my father's this time, not mine, someone else's, a woman's voice unfamiliar but warm, almost tender. "It's safe. Come closer." My knees weakened, my mind screamed to turn, to run back into the swamp, even if it meant dying lost. But the boat was my only way out. I crept forward, every plank creaking under my weight. My flashlight caught the hull of the boat, slick with dew, rocking gently. The rope was still tied. For a moment, I let myself believe. Then something shifted inside the boat. Not much, just a shadow stirring, a shape too large to belong. The glow came next. Green, faint at first, then brightening, pulsing from within the boat's hull as though it breathed. The same light I had followed days ago, thinking it some strange amphibian wonder. My throat tightened. It had been here, waiting, patient as the swamp itself. I stumbled back, breath ragged, and the dock groaned with my retreat. The glow brightened and the boat rocked harder, water lapping against wood in steady rhythm. Then, slowly, impossibly, the voice came again, this time from everywhere, from the water, the reeds, the fog itself. "Don't leave, Elena. Stay." The words overlapped, tangled, dozens of voices layered together. My father, my own, the woman's, others I didn't recognize. Voices of the missing hikers, maybe. Voices that would never return. The dock shook violently. A massive shape rose from the water beside it, slick limbs unfolding, throat blazing green, its eyes fixed on me, wide, glassy, patient. For the first time, it did not speak. It simply opened its mouth. The sound that poured out wasn't words. It was a low, resonant vibration that thrummed through the planks, through my chest, into my bones. It wasn't meant for mimicry. It was meant to paralyze. My legs buckled. The flashlight slipped from my grip and rolled into the water with a splash, swallowed instantly by darkness. The glow from its throat became my only light, painting the mist a sickly green. Elena. One word, whispered directly into my skull, bypassing ears, bypassing air. I screamed, not from courage, but from the primal terror of being known, completely, intimately, by something that was not human. My hand clawed blindly at my belt until it closed on the last flare. I ripped the cap, sparks hissing to life, and thrust the flame toward its face. The thing recoiled, shrieking in a pitch so high it shattered the air. Steam rose where sparks struck its skin, and for the first time I saw it falter. I didn't think. I ran. Not for the boat, but back into the swamp, flare raised high. My mind had shattered free of plans, free of logic. I no longer wanted to escape by its rules. I only wanted to survive one more hour, one more breath, one more heartbeat. Behind me, the water erupted. Splashes hammered the surface, reeds thrashed violently. It was coming, fast and furious now, abandoning patience for raw pursuit. I tore through the swamp, flare burning low, lungs tearing for air. Mud clutched, branches slashed, fog blinded, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The flare hissed lower and lower, sparks spitting weakly. When it finally died, darkness swallowed me whole. I collapsed against a tree trunk, chest heaving, throat raw from sobs I hadn't realized were tearing out of me. Silence closed in. Then a ripple spread across the water nearby, slow, deliberate. I pressed my hands against my ears, eyes squeezed shut, whispering over and over, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But I knew the truth, and it wasn't finished with me. I don't remember blacking out, but when I opened my eyes, the fog was thinner, bruised with the color of dawn. My body was soaked, mud-caked, every muscle locked from exhaustion. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it all, that the swamp had merely swallowed me into fever and nightmares. Then I heard the water move, not the casual lap of wind or current, but the deliberate shift of something vast sliding just beneath the surface. The reeds quivered. My skin prickled cold. No dream, still here, still hunted. I forced myself upright, every joint screaming. My pack was gone. My radio too. Only the small sample tubes in my jacket remained, pressing cold against my ribs. I clutched them like talismans, as if proof of its existence could anchor me to reality. Somewhere in the mist, it exhaled, a wet, rattling sigh that carried far too close. My pulse staggered. I staggered with it, stumbling forward, half dragging myself through mud and shallow pools. The air stank of rot so thick I gagged, but I kept moving. Through a gap in the fog, I saw high ground, an island of knotted roots and stunted trees rising from the swamp. I scrambled toward it, slipping, crawling, fingers clawing mud. By the time I collapsed at its base, my chest felt crushed, lungs raw with swamp air. The island was small, maybe 20 meters across, but it offered what the swamp hadn't. Height. A view. I climbed the roots, boots slipping, and pulled myself onto the knotted rise. From here, the fog stretched in all directions, a rolling sea of gray. I saw no dock, no boat, no camp, only endless swamp. But I wasn't alone. Across the water, the mist glowed faintly green, one pulse, then another, like a heartbeat, steady, patient. It was watching. I yanked a branch from one of the stunted trees, my hands shaking. It wasn't a weapon, not really, but I needed something to hold, something to make me feel less small. My chest heaved with every breath, each exhale loud in the suffocating silence. "Stay back," I croaked, my voice little more than a rasp. The glow dimmed, then, impossibly, it answered, in my voice. "Stay back." The sound chilled me deeper than the swamp ever could. It wasn't just repeating anymore. It was rehearsing, refining, becoming. Water surged at the island's edge. Mud bubbled, roots trembled, then it rose. The creature hauled itself halfway out of the swamp, limbs unfolding, body slick with ooze. In daylight, its form was worse than in the dark. Skin stretched thin over corded muscle, glistening like oil. Its wide head tilted, throat pulsing green. Its eyes, flat, unblinking, locked to mine. And then, in a voice nearly indistinguishable from my own, it whispered, "I am Elena." My stomach heaved. Rage cut through terror, sudden and raw. "You're not me," I screamed, thrusting the branch like a spear. It struck its chest with a dull smack and snapped uselessly. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its head again, throat flaring brighter, and spoke with startling clarity. "I am you. Stay. Be with me." The swamp seemed to lean in, the fog folding tighter, the air vibrating with its words. I felt my will slipping, my thoughts muddying. My own voice echoed back at me, distorted but close enough that some primitive part of my brain wanted to believe. I clutched the sample tubes, my last link to reason, and forced myself to focus. Data. Evidence. Survival. If I could just make it out, just bring proof, maybe this thing would mean something beyond the swamp. The creature shifted closer, water dripping from its limbs, eyes never leaving mine. My heartbeat stuttered in time with its glow. My legs shook so violently I thought they'd give out. And then, like a miracle, I saw it. Behind the creature, past the reeds, the fog thinned just enough to reveal open water. A wider channel, sluggish but flowing. If I could reach it, I could follow the current. Maybe it led somewhere, anywhere. I took a step back, never lowering my eyes. "No," I whispered. "You don't get me." The thing blinked, slow, almost curious, and then I ran. Down the roots, splashing into knee-deep water, lungs ripping for air. Behind me, the swamp exploded, water churning, reeds thrashing. It was coming, faster than anything so large should move. I forced my legs forward, every step agony, every breath fire. The current pulled at me as I reached the channel, like tugging me sideways. I let it. I threw myself in, body half submerged, clutching the sample tubes to my chest. The cold shocked me breathless. Behind me, the water heaved as the creature entered. Its flow flared brighter, cutting through fog. It closed the distance in seconds. I kicked, thrashed, let the current drag me, my limbs burning with exhaustion. For a moment, its hand broke the surface beside me, webbed fingers brushing my jacket. I screamed, twisting free, heart shrieking in my ears. Then, suddenly, the current surged stronger, pulling me faster than I could swim. The water foamed, and for the first time, distance opened between us. The glow receded, swallowed by mist. I didn't stop until the current spat me onto a bank of mud and reeds. I crawled up, retching swamp water, clutching the samples so tight they dug bruises into my ribs. My body trembled violently, lungs shredding each breath. The fog was thinner here. Above, a sliver of pale sky broke through. Civilization wasn't visible, not yet, but for the first time I believed escape might be possible. I collapsed on the bank, sobbing, half in relief, half in terror. I was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. But as I lay there shaking, one thought hollowed me out. It had let me go. Not beaten, not outwitted, allowed, the mimicry, the patience, the intelligence. It wasn't finished. It had my voice now, my words, my fear. It would use them. Perhaps not here, perhaps not now, but somewhere. Someone else would hear me calling from the mist, and they wouldn't know better until it was too late. I staggered to my feet, clutching the tubes, and whispered to no one, to myself, to the swamp. This isn't over. And the fog, heavy, endless, listening, didn't disagree. My name is Captain Eric Madsen, formerly of the NATO Special Operations Response Unit. I was trained to survive in places most people would never set foot in. Frozen mountains, deserts of dust, cities in ruins where no maps remained accurate. They called us operators, but survivalist was closer to the truth. War isn't only about fighting, it's about staying alive long enough to return home. I thought I left that world behind when I resigned 5 years ago. My exit was quiet, not celebrated. Men like me don't retire with medals pinned to our chests. But I wasn't done with the wilderness. I turned my skills into a business, training soldiers and scientists who had to operate in unforgiving conditions. That's how I ended up here, in northern Alaska, in the open wound of winter where the sun dipped below the horizon at 3 p.m. and didn't bother to return until morning. The Brooks Range loomed like white teeth against the horizon, jagged and cruel, black rock piercing through the snow in sharp ridges. The sky was a faded canvas of pale green aurora ripples, wavering silently above. The air itself seemed solid, so cold it bit into exposed skin instantly, frosting nose hairs, stealing warmth from lungs with every breath. The silence pressed hard against my eardrums until even the crunch of my boots on snow sounded like gunshots. I was alone. My group of trainees, a handful of American and Canadian soldiers, had already been flown out earlier that morning after completing a week of cold weather survival exercises. They thought the training was over. For them, it was. For me, it wasn't. The Army had asked me to recover equipment caches left in the tundra, GPS beacons, and a missing survival tent that had blown loose during a storm. A simple job. An excuse to stay behind, maybe, because part of me thrived in the silence and solitude that broke other men. But I had barely been alone for an hour when I noticed the first irregularity. It came as a faint pressure in the air, like the moment before an avalanche when the atmosphere grows heavy, holding its breath. I stopped, snow powder spilling from my boots, my breath fogging the inside of my balaclava. I listened. Wind. Only wind. But then something else. Madsen. I froze. My name had carried across the white expanse, muffled yet clear, as if whispered right against the shell of my ear. The hair on the back of my neck stiffened, a sensation I hadn't felt since Helmand Province when I knew I was being watched through a sniper's scope. My first instinct was tactical. Crouch low, scan for silhouettes, check sightlines. But there was nothing. Only pale ridges, the endless snow, and the sky's bleeding green curtain. I pulled my radio free from its pouch, adjusted the frequency, and pressed transmit. "This is Captain Madsen, Grid 508. Anyone else still out here?" Only static answered me. Then, beneath the static, something like a chuckle, a laugh that sounded like my own voice, recorded and played back at half volume. I switched off the unit and shoved it deep into my parka. That wasn't possible. Radios malfunction, sure, but they don't mimic laughter. I shook it off and kept moving, forcing myself into the rhythm of marching through snow. One step, plant, drag the sled, breathe. My compass hung from my neck, but I stopped trusting it 10 minutes later when the needle spun in lazy circles no matter how I oriented it. The horizon here gave no guidance. White was above, white below, a mirror of desolation. I navigated instead by ridges, memorizing the curve of rock where the storm had scoured it bare. The deeper I walked, the more the silence weighed on me. You don't notice silence until you've been stripped of sound completely. It was so thick here that even my heartbeat seemed amplified, echoing through my chest. And then I heard it again. "Madsen, over here." This time it was a shout, masculine, familiar. My gut clenched. It was Private Jenkins's voice, one of the young soldiers I had trained just days ago. But that wasn't possible. They were gone. I had watched them load into the aircraft. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon. My breath hissed in my throat. A figure moved briefly between two snow ridges, tall, bundled in cold weather gear, but then it was gone. A trick of light, maybe. The aurora overhead flickered, and shadows shifted unnaturally across the ice. I gripped my rifle tighter. I wasn't here for combat, but old habits demanded I carry it. The weapon was cold comfort now. My training told me something was wrong in the way a sixth sense whispers before an ambush. I couldn't explain it, but the snowfield didn't feel empty anymore. As I pressed forward, the terrain changed. The snow crust gave way to a frozen lake, black veins of ice stretching in all directions under a thin shell. My boots crackled on the surface. Each step sent echoes groaning through the ice like the belly of a living thing. The wind picked up, carrying fragments of sound that twisted in my ears. I heard my name again. But this time it wasn't Jenkins's voice. It was my brother Henrik's. Henrik had been dead for 15 years. The sound hit me like a blow. My vision tunneled. The cold forgotten for one suspended moment where memory and reality blurred. I was back in Copenhagen, at his funeral, staring at the flag-draped coffin. His voice should not exist here. It could not. And yet across the frozen lake it rose again, soft and pleading. "Eric, help me." I closed my eyes hard, forced my breath steady. My brother was gone. This was something else, something using me against myself. That realization, though cold as the air, actually steadied me because it meant I was dealing with a threat, and threats can be survived. Still, my chest ached in a way no battlefield had ever caused. To hear his voice again in this desolate place was almost unbearable. I retreated off the lake, boots crunching onto solid snow. My survival instincts screamed, "Stay mobile, find shelter, establish a perimeter." The old Cold War listening station was marked only a mile north, a rusting skeleton of antennas abandoned decades ago. I shifted course toward it. Behind me on the frozen lake, I heard footsteps, heavy, matching my stride. I did not turn around. Instead, I increased pace, my sled creaking behind me, breath burning my lungs. Each crunch of my boots was mirrored by another set, always behind, always perfectly aligned with mine. Not once closer, not once farther away. When I finally dared to look back, the lake was empty. No tracks but mine scored the surface. And yet the footsteps did not stop. They circled me in the air itself, unseen but constant, like the tundra itself had learned to mimic sound. And then, just before I reached the black silhouette of the abandoned station, I heard my own voice whisper in perfect clarity, "Don't go inside." I stopped dead in my tracks. The whisper had been mine, not just the sound of my voice, but the exact cadence, the clipped delivery I'd honed through years of briefing soldiers. Hearing it spill into the air from nowhere was like watching my own reflection step out of the mirror and smile back at me. For the first time in a long while, I felt fear bite through the discipline I had carried like armor. The abandoned listening station loomed ahead, a skeletal outline against the green aurora shimmer. Once, during the Cold War, it had been manned to track Soviet aircraft drifting across the Arctic. Now it was nothing but rusting metal ribs and decaying siding, its antenna towers bent like broken spears. The place reeked of iron, like even from here, an acrid tang that clung to the back of my throat. But the whisper echoed in my skull, warning me, "Don't go inside." I gritted my teeth and moved forward anyway. Fear is a tool. You either sharpen it into focus or let it rot you from within. My training demanded I push into the unknown, not back away. The snow deepened as I reached the station. Corrugated metal walls leaned at odd angles, some sections buried beneath ice that had frozen in jagged waves. A door hung half open, groaning in the wind. I paused in the threshold, scanning with my rifle raised, light mounted beneath the barrel, cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved. The interior was a shell of its former self, rows of consoles with their wires gutted, chairs overturned, frost creeping in crystalline fingers across every surface. The silence was worse here, heavier, as though the walls sealed me off from the outside world entirely. And then, breaking that silence, came a sound I knew too well, boots pacing across the metal floor. I swept the light across the far wall. No one was there. But the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, closing the distance. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced my breathing steady, sight picture aligned. "Show yourself," I barked. My voice was firm, commanding. The footsteps stopped. Then, in the exact tone and pitch of my own command, the air answered, "Show yourself." A bead of sweat traced down my temple, freezing before it fell. My finger hovered near the trigger, but I didn't fire. You can't shoot an echo. The thing, it had intelligence. That much was clear now. It wasn't random mimicry. It was playing, testing me, probing my reactions. I backed against a rusted console, my mind racing through options. Fire? Noise? Light? Predators test boundaries until they understand prey. My task was to convince it I wasn't prey. I slammed the butt of my rifle against the metal wall. The crash echoed like thunder, reverberating through the hollow chamber. For several seconds there was nothing. The silence returned, suffocating. Then it spoke again, but not in my voice. "Eric." Henrik's voice. My brother's voice. So close it felt like he stood behind me, just out of sight. I squeezed my eyes shut. My chest ached as memory rushed in. His laugh, the way he teased me when we were boys, the scream when the car hit him that winter night. The entity couldn't have known that. It shouldn't have known that. Unless it wasn't just copying sound. Unless it was reaching deeper. I forced myself to move. Standing still was death. I found a stairwell leading upward and climbed, my boots clanging on metal steps that trembled under my weight. Each step carried me higher into the skeleton of the tower until I emerged into a room with shattered windows. Cold air poured in, slicing through me like knives. From here, The antenna mast rose above, half collapsed, its steel bones groaning against the wind. I set my sled aside, dropped my pack, and pulled free a bundle of flares. If sound couldn't hold it back, maybe fire would. I cracked one flare, and the sudden bloom of red light painted the room in blood hues. The shadows recoiled, or maybe it was only my imagination. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt a thin thread of control. Fire. Fire always reminds living things to keep their distance. But then the voices returned, not one, not two, but dozens, whispering, laughing, weeping, all layered, all spilling into each other. Some in English, some in Danish, some in tongues I didn't recognize. They weren't only in the room, they were in my skull, vibrating behind my eyes until pain stabbed through my temples. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, I couldn't fight sound with bullets. I needed a shield. The flare's smoke curled toward the radio console, still bolted to the floor, its dials frozen in place. I dragged myself toward it, ripping cables loose, searching for anything I could salvage. Coaxial wiring, copper. I could rig a crude antenna, maybe attract atmospheric static strong enough to disrupt the thing's mimicry. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years of improvising with field gear. Strip wire, loop through broken mast, secure to console. My breath fogged the air as I worked, each exhale ragged. The voices rose in intensity, some so loud I swore they came from inside my skull. One in particular cut sharper than the rest. My own voice, whispering exactly what I was doing. Word for word, half a second before I did it. Strip wire, loop through mast, secure to console. I faltered. My fingers trembled. It was anticipating me. Predicting. Like a mirror that moved just ahead of my reflection. I slammed my fist against the console. Shut up! The voices obeyed. Silence, total, suffocating. That was almost worse. I finished the rig, heart hammering. The wind outside whipped through the broken window, tugging at the jury-rigged antenna. I struck another flare and wedged it against the base, praying heat and static would be enough to draw the thing's attention away from me. For a moment, there was nothing but the hiss of burning magnesium. Then the old radio sputtered, crackling with static, a broken cough of sound that built into a steady whine. And from within that static, my voice rose again. You can't leave me here. The words pulsed through the broken speakers, over and over, layered with Henrik's voice, Jenkins' voice, voices of men and women I had trained, fought beside, buried, all demanding, pleading, mocking. I staggered back, flare shaking in my grip. My lungs ached for air. My thoughts spiraled. This wasn't only sound anymore, it was memory, emotion, identity itself, twisted and reflected back at me. I realized then, the thing didn't just mimic, it consumed. It learned the shape of your fears, your grief, and it wore them like camouflage. The flare hissed down to its last sparks. My red-lit refuge faded into darkness. Outside, the wind howled, and beneath it, I heard boots crunching in snow again. Not one pair this time. Many. Surrounding the station, closing in. The footsteps multiplied until the very walls seemed to quake with their rhythm. A squad was outside. That's what my ears told me. A full patrol, boots stamping in staggered cadence as they encircled the listening station. But I knew the truth. There was no squad. No men to back me up. It was the thing. I pressed my back to the frozen wall, rifle lifted, flare sputtering in my hand, until only a ghost of red embers clung to it. The shadows deepened. The air pressed heavy, thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere had grown sentient and decided I didn't belong. The boots stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then, from every direction at once, voices erupted. Madsen. Captain. Eric. Brother. Don't go inside. Help me. Each one stabbed through me, slack voices I recognized and others I didn't. Some barked orders in clipped military English, others whispered lullabies in Danish I hadn't heard since childhood. One voice was my mother's, and I nearly buckled at the knees. I forced myself to breathe slow, deliberate. This was its attack. Psychological, not physical. That didn't make it less dangerous. If anything, it was worse. You can patch a wound. You can't patch a fractured mind. I had to remind myself who I was. Name, rank, background, grounding techniques, the kind drilled into us for interrogation resistance. My name is Captain Eric Madsen, I whispered into the dark, teeth clenched against the cold. Born Copenhagen, Denmark. NATO Special Operations. Blood type O negative. I am alive. I am alone. The voices faltered, flickered, some fell silent. Others repeated me, lagging half a second behind, like echoes from a broken canyon wall. I am alive. I am alone. The sound of myself spoken back at me nearly undid me. I slung the rifle across my chest and grabbed my pack, searching desperately. I needed light, fire, noise, something human to drown this out. My fingers found a bundle of chem lights. I cracked them all at once, neon green spilling across the floor, puddling on the frost. The glow was weak, but it pushed shadows into corners. That was when I saw them. Boot prints. Dozens, maybe hundreds, stamped into the frost-covered floor. Some big, some small, some barefoot. They overlapped until the room was a mosaic of passage. But I had checked when I entered. The floor had been untouched, blanketed in ice. These tracks had appeared only now. They circled me. The voices lowered to a murmur, then to a chorus of breathing. Not heavy, not labored, but steady, like an audience leaning in to listen. I snapped my rifle to low ready and fired a single shot into the ceiling. The report exploded in the chamber, plaster raining down, my ears ringing. The breathing stopped instantly. For the first time since stepping into this hell, I felt a fragment of dominance. I reloaded, cycling the bolt loud, purposeful. I'm not prey, I snarled, but the station disagreed. From the radio console, static erupted, not faint, but deafening, a wall of white noise that shook the rusted frame. My jury-rigged antenna had woken something, or maybe the thing had decided to use it as a mouthpiece. Through the static, a single voice cut clear. My own. You can't leave me here. The repetition slammed into me like waves, over and over until my thoughts blurred. I clamped my palms over my ears, but the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was in my head. Panic clawed at me, hot and primal. For a moment, I wanted to run into the snow, leave everything, just escape the sound. But training is a leash. I forced myself to think. Options, tactics, terrain, the antenna. If I'd awakened it, maybe I could overload it. Give the thing something bigger to latch onto, burn itself out. I fumbled through my pack for thermite grenades, small meant for equipment denial. My fingers found the ridged casing. Relief almost buckled my knees. I pulled one, yanked the pin, and slammed it onto the base of the console. The hiss roared, white flames spewing, sparks gnawing through metal. Heat blasted back, thawing frost in sudden rivulets. The voices screamed. Not words, not language, but raw shrieks of distortion that shredded through me. The static warped, fractured, as though the thing recoiled from the fire. I staggered back, shielding my face. The thermite devoured the console. Metal glowing orange, cables snapping in bursts. The old station filled with acrid smoke, biting my throat, searing my lungs, and then silence. The voices were gone. For the first time since the whisper called my name on the tundra, the world held still. Only the hiss of molten metal remained. I wanted to believe I had burned it out, destroyed its mouth. But the silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like retreat. I gathered my gear with shaking hands, strapped on my pack, and made for the stairwell. The chem lights guttered behind me, their green glow swallowed by smoke. As I descended, I noticed something that froze my blood. The boot prints had multiplied. They weren't only on the floor now, they climbed the walls, streaked the ceiling, twisted impossibly where no human foot could stand, and every single print pointed inward, toward me. I forced myself down the stairs 2 at a time, out through the broken doorway, into the raw night air. The cold hit like a hammer, but it was clean, empty. I gulped it down, chest burning. The tundra stretched wide, pale under the aurora. The station hunched behind me like a wounded beast. My compass still spun uselessly, but I set my bearings by the mountains to the north. I had to keep moving. Staying in one place meant giving it time to regroup. My boots crunched across the snow. My sled groaned. For a brief stretch, only natural sounds accompanied me. Then, somewhere far out in the darkness, boots crunched in perfect rhythm with mine. I tightened my grip on the sled's handle and forced my eyes forward. I would not give it the satisfaction of looking back. But the sound followed, every step aligned with mine, every pause perfectly mirrored. I didn't stop moving until my lungs burned raw. When I finally did, bent double in the snow, I realized the sound had stopped too. And then I heard a voice. My voice. Not behind me this time, but directly ahead. I told you not to go inside. The sound of my own voice echoing from the tundra froze me harder than the cold ever could. I had faced men with rifles, men with bombs strapped to their chests, men who laughed in the face of death. None of them rattled me like this. Hearing myself speak from the dark ahead of me as though I had already walked into the trap. I raised my rifle, scanning the barren white. The aurora's green shimmer twisted above, painting everything in shifting light. Nothing moved, only the endless snow ridges and the low black teeth of the mountains. "Who's there?" I called out, though I already knew the answer. The wind carried my question back. Or maybe it wasn't the wind. "Who's there?" It mocked in my voice. Perfectly timed, perfectly pitched. I clenched my jaw and pressed forward. The first rule when dealing with an intelligent predator: deny it dominance. Don't let it dictate the pace. Keep moving. But as I trudged onward, dragging the sled, I realized something horrifying. The voice wasn't behind me anymore. It wasn't in front either. It was everywhere. My boots crunched. My breath hissed in the mask. And layered with those sounds came the faintest whispers. Time to each inhale, each exhale. Not words, not yet, but a rhythm, like it was syncing itself with me. My thoughts darkened. Maybe it wasn't outside at all. Maybe it had already found a way inside. I shook it off. You can't afford spirals like that in survival situations. I forced myself to focus on objectives: shelter, fire, orientation. If I could reach the old airstrip, I could signal for pickup. It was 20 kilometers east, a brutal march, but not impossible. I adjusted my course, leaning into the wind. That was when I saw the figure. A man standing on the ridge. Snow whipped around him, but his posture was unmistakable, upright, rigid, a silhouette against the aurora. He wore cold weather gear, hood drawn up, rifle slung across his chest. For a moment, relief surged. One of the trainees? A ranger? Someone else caught out here? But as I stared, the relief curdled. His stance was wrong. Too still. Not shifting weight, not bracing against the wind like a cutout planted in the snow. And then I noticed the detail that made my stomach twist. His rifle was the same as mine. Same sling, same scratches on the stock. He was me. The figure raised his head slowly. I couldn't see the face beneath the hood, but I didn't need to. I knew it mirrored mine. "Go back," he said. My voice projected across the frozen expanse. My throat went dry. "You're not real." The figure tilted its head the way I do when correcting a trainee. "You're not real," it answered. I lifted my rifle, aiming square at him. Last warning. He mirrored me. Same movement, same precision. My scope filled with my own reflection, gun leveled at me from across the snow. My heart hammered. Every instinct screamed to fire to erase it, but something deeper held me back. If it was me, if it was built from me, what would happen if I shot? Would I be killing myself? The hesitation was all it needed. The figure collapsed in on itself, folding like a shadow, sinking into the snow without a sound. In its place, the tundra lay smooth, untouched. No prints, no trace. A shiver climbed my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I pressed onward, boots crunching, forcing my body into motion before paralysis could take hold. Distance. That was my weapon now. Keep moving, keep distance. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, I realized the snowfield wasn't behaving normally. Landmarks I swore I had passed before reappeared. A jagged ridge, a bent pine blackened by frost. My bearings frayed. The mountains seemed to drift, sliding across the horizon like pieces on a board. I was being funneled, herded. I stopped, chest heaving, sweat freezing against my skin. My sled creaked behind me, burden heavier than ever. I dropped to one knee, drawing in shallow breaths. That was when I heard it again. Not a voice this time, a sound older, deeper, a low hum. It vibrated through the snow beneath me, a bass frequency that rattled my bones. I pressed a gloved hand to the ground, and the hum grew stronger. Not mechanical, not natural either. It was alive. The snow to my left shifted, just a fraction, as though something massive stirred beneath it. I staggered back, rifle raised. The drift bulged, cracked, then settled again, still as death. The hum deepened, resonating inside my skull until my vision blurred. I clenched my teeth, willing myself to stay upright. If I collapsed now, I knew I wouldn't rise again. "Eric," my brother's voice whispered. Not from the air, from the ground, from beneath the ice. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My boots slipped, striking hollow against the frozen lake I hadn't realized I had wandered onto again. The ice groaned beneath me, black veins spidering outward. "Help me," Henrik begged from under the surface. His voice was muffled, distorted, as though he were pounding from inside the ice. My chest seized. I could almost see him there, his face blurred beneath the frost, eyes wide, lips moving in desperate plea. I slammed the butt of my rifle against the ice. "You're not him," I roared. My voice cracked the silence like thunder. "You're nothing," the lake answered with a single sharp crack. A fissure raced across the surface, splitting the ice beneath my boots. Panic clawed me. I bolted, sprinting for the far bank, sled lurching and skidding behind me. Each step sent new fractures racing outward, ice groaning like some ancient thing waking. My lungs burned, legs screaming, but adrenaline drove me forward until my boots struck solid snow again. I collapsed onto hands and knees, sucking air, staring back at the lake. The fissures glowed faintly, green light pulsing upward from beneath, as if the aurora had roots in the earth. The hum faded. The voice of my brother went silent, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. The tundra stretched on, but I could no longer trust distance or direction. It was pulling me, reshaping terrain, feeding me ghosts of my own past. The only question was how long before it found the one voice that would finally break me. I rose, dragging the sled forward, every step a war. The cold gnawed deeper, no longer merely freezing but alive, a predator draped in snow. And somewhere, walking just out of sight, my own footsteps kept perfect pace. By the time I cleared the lake and staggered into the low ridges beyond, my body felt hollowed out. Every muscle throbbed, every breath scalded my lungs. But worse than the physical toll was the gnawing certainty that I wasn't charting my own path anymore. The tundra was moving me. Every landmark I tried to hold in memory, every bent tree, every jagged stone, slipped away, reappearing behind me, ahead of me, out of sequence. I was walking in circles I couldn't see. The aurora twisted overhead, brighter now, unnatural in its intensity. Curtains of green licked the horizon like fire caught in slow motion. The beauty of it, once awe-inspiring, now felt like camouflage. Like the sky itself was complicit in hurting me where it wanted. I knew what that meant. The entity wasn't just a voice or an echo, it was the landscape. The snow, the ice, the air itself. I wasn't walking through it, I was walking inside it, and it wanted something. "Eric," Henrik's voice crooned softly from behind me. Not urgent this time, not desperate, persuasive, almost gentle. "You don't have to fight." I refused to turn around. I fixed my eyes on the ridgeline ahead, forcing my boots to keep their rhythm. Crunch, drag, breathe. Crunch, drag, breathe. "Come back with me," the voice said. My mind flooded with images. Our childhood in Copenhagen, snowball fights on the street, Henrik's grin when he scored a goal during our football games. Then the image shifted, his body broken, twisted on icy asphalt, headlights fading into the night. I bit down on the memory like a bullet, grinding my teeth until I tasted blood. That wasn't him. That was bait. But the thing wasn't giving up. The voice changed, shifting through registers like a radio dial. Jenkins, the young soldier I'd trained. My father. Commanding officers long dead. Women I'd known. Strangers too, but spoken with the perfect intimacy of people who knew my secrets. Each one whispered the same refrain. Stop walking. I wanted to scream, to drown them out. Instead, I forced myself to sing, an old Danish marching song Henrik and I had shouted as boys when we hiked in the forests. My voice cracked, hoarse, but the rhythm steadied me. The voices tried to cut in, overlapping, mocking, but my song gave me something to grip. I pushed onward until my legs buckled, collapsing against a snowbank. I couldn't keep this up forever. My mind was unraveling thread by thread. That was when I saw it. The outline of a cabin. Outline of a cabin. At first I thought it was another trick, another shadow conjured by the aurora. But as I staggered closer, the details sharpened. Rough-hewn logs, roof half collapsed, a door hanging crooked. Smoke didn't rise from its chimney, but the faintest glow pulsed through a crack in the boards, warm and orange. Shelter. Every survival instinct in me screamed caution. Cabins don't sit abandoned in this part of Alaska, not this far from settlements. And yet, here it was, a refuge appearing at the moment I was weakest. That alone told me it was bait. But bait can be used. I crawled to the threshold, rifle ready, heart hammering. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the glow wasn't firelight. It was a lantern, old, oil-fed, its glass fogged but intact. The rest of the cabin was bare, save for a cot, a table, and walls covered in scratches. Not carvings, not words, just scratches. Hundreds, maybe thousands, gouged into the wood, overlapping until they blurred into one chaotic scrawl. I swept the light across them and my stomach lurched. Some of the scratches weren't random. They were tally marks, 4 vertical, 1 diagonal, over and over. Countless tallies, stretching from floor to ceiling. How many had stood here before me, carving their days, their hours, their desperation into the walls before the thing took them? The voices returned, softer now, coaxing. You're tired, Eric. Rest. You can't fight it forever. You know what we want. I dropped to my knees, head in my hands. My thoughts swirled like the snow outside. What did it want? It wasn't killing me outright. It could have drowned me in the lake, crushed me beneath the ice. Instead, it wore me down, stripping my defenses. It wanted me to yield. But why me? I forced myself up, stumbling to the table. The lantern's light caught a scrap of fabric beneath it, a strip of canvas torn from a survival tent. My blood ran cold. It was the missing tent, the one I had been sent to recover. This wasn't chance. This was design. The mission had been nothing but a lure to bring me here. The realization hit like a blade of ice through my chest. It had wanted me alone. It had chosen me. I backed toward the door, but the voices surged, overlapping until they thundered. Stay. The word rattled the cabin walls, dust raining from the ceiling. The lantern flickered, guttered, and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. I bolted outside, lungs tearing for air. The aurora above writhed violently, green curtains whipping as though caught in some unseen storm. Snow shifted ahead of me, rising in a wave. From beneath it, shapes began to emerge, half-formed, human-sized, clawing their way upward. They weren't solid. Shadows given muscle, features blurred, but their movements deliberate. 1, 2, 5, a dozen, all rising from the drifts like soldiers from shallow graves. Each one bore my face. I staggered back, rifle raised, breath frozen in my throat. The nearest figure tilted its head, mimicking my own nervous tick. Another adjusted its grip on a phantom rifle. Another mouthed words I couldn't hear, but I knew. You can't leave. My finger curled around the trigger. For the first time in years, I doubted whether pulling it would matter. What's a bullet to something made of snow and memory? But I squeezed anyway. The shot ripped through the nearest figure, shredding snow into a spray. For a moment it collapsed. Then, slowly, impossibly, it reformed. Snow gathering back into shape, my own face staring at me once more. The others advanced, silent, step by step, surrounding me. And for the first time, I felt a thought slip unbidden into my head, not mine, but planted. You were never meant to survive this place. The circle tightened. Snow-crusted boots pressed closer, deliberate, crunching in perfect rhythm. My own face multiplied a dozen times over, jaws moving in silence, eyes glinting like black glass under the aurora. Each figure moved with a precision that terrified me. Not clumsy like illusions, not chaotic like shadows. They moved like soldiers, like me. I kept the rifle leveled, heart pounding, breath steaming in quick bursts. I'd faced ambushes, sieges, kill zones, but nothing like this. When your enemy looks like you, moves like you, even thinks like you, there's nowhere to anchor certainty. Stay back, I growled. My voice cracked. It sounded weak even to me. In answer, one of the doubles peeled forward. His gait was identical to mine, measured, weight shifting to the outside edge of the boots first. His rifle came up. I saw every scar on the stock, every scrape on the magazine. It was mine. I fired. The shot tore through his chest. Snow exploded outward, and for an instant he staggered, collapsing into drift. Relief sparked. But then the snow swirled, reknit, and he rose again, unmarked. His hood fell back, and I saw my own face staring back at me, grinning. "You can't kill what you are," it said, my voice rich with mockery. The others repeated in chorus. "You can't kill what you are. You can't kill what you are." I backed toward the ridgeline, boots crunching, sled dragging, lungs heaving. Every instinct screamed to run, but training chained me to discipline. Keep eyes on the threat. Don't expose your back. The circle parted, making room, ushering me toward the ridge. Not an attack, a funnel. Hurting again. "What do you want?" I shouted. My voice cracked raw, but I needed it to hear me, needed to force dialogue. The doubles stopped. Their heads tilted in unison like animals hearing a distant sound. Then one stepped forward, me, but younger, leaner, with Henrik's smile burned across his face. "We want you to stay," it whispered. A laugh barked out of me, broken and hollow. "You've got the wrong man." The grin widened. "No, you've been ours since the first whisper." The air grew heavy, pressure building against my skull. The aurora churned, tendrils of green light stabbing downward until the snow itself glowed faintly. The doubles melted back into the drifts, dissolving into the very landscape until only I remained on the ridge, alone again. But I wasn't free. The snow beneath my boots pulsed, once, twice, like a heartbeat. And in that vibration, a realization clicked into place. It wasn't trying to kill me because it needed me, needed my voice, my memories, my shape. That's why it had copied me. Why it kept pressing Henrik's voice into my ears. It wasn't hunting me. It was recruiting me. The thought chilled me worse than the wind, to become part of it, an echo in its endless chorus, trapped in snow and static forever. That was its hunger. Not flesh, not blood. Identity. "No," I spat. My voice wavered, but the word felt like steel. "You don't get me." I pulled a flare, cracked it, hurled it into the snow. Red light hissed, dyeing the drifts bloody. The ground recoiled, snow boiling back like flesh touched by fire. The hum faltered. For a heartbeat, I had the upper hand. I grabbed another flare, another, scattering them in a ring. The light cut through the dark, painting shadows across the ice. The snow's pulse slowed, the voices in my skull dimmed to whispers. But I knew it wouldn't last. Fire is a shield, never a weapon. When the flames died, it would close in again. I dug into my sled, hands shaking, and pulled free the last of my demolition kit. A block of C4, 2 detonators, enough to cripple a bridge or maybe collapse a piece of whatever hive this thing had beneath the ice. The decision came hard. Survival meant retreat, signaling for pickup, extraction. But this wasn't something I could leave behind. If I walked away, it would whisper into someone else. Another trainee. Another wanderer. I set the charge against the ridge, wiring it quick and crude, gloved fingers fumbling on frozen metal. Sweat froze to my skin. My breath came ragged. As I worked, the voices crept back, softer now, coaxing. Henrik again. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," I muttered. My throat was raw. "You'll die out here. Better than what you're offering." The detonator clicked into place. I stepped back, flare trembling in my grip. My whole body shook, exhaustion threading into terror, but I stood tall, teeth bared to the night. "If you want me," I snarled into the darkness, "come and take me." The snow roared, not shifted, not hummed, roared. An avalanche of sound, voices shrieking, sobbing, laughing all at once. The ground heaved beneath my boots, and from the drifts around me, figures erupted. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all with my face, surging forward in a tide. I slammed my thumb on the detonator. The ridge exploded. White fire ripped the night apart, snow and stone and echoes tearing skyward. The shockwave hurled me backward, slammed me into the ice, rattled my teeth loose. The aurora fractured, green curtains torn into jagged streaks. Then silence. I lay stunned, ears ringing, vision blurred. Snow drifted down, fine as ash. Where the ridge had stood was now a gaping wound in the earth, steaming, glowing faintly from within. The voices were gone, no whispers, no footsteps, just the howl of wind across the broken tundra. I staggered to my knees, coughing, chest heaving. Had I done it? Had I burned it out? Or had I only cut off one finger of something vaster, something sprawling beneath the ice for miles? My compass still spun. The aurora still writhed. The silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like a pause. I hauled the sled upright, body screaming in protest. I didn't know if I could make the airstrip anymore. Didn't know if the radio would reach anyone. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, because if I stopped, if I rested too long, I might hear it again. I took one step, then another. The snow groaned beneath me, and just as I began to believe I'd won myself a reprieve, the wind shifted. A whisper curled past my ear. "You're one of us now." I didn't answer the whisper. If I did, I was afraid I'd start agreeing with it. Instead, I bent my head into the wind and dragged the sled east, boots carving trenches through snow that wanted to swallow me whole. Every step was agony, but the silence between steps was worse. When the thing had filled the air with screams, at least I knew where it was. This quiet, this patient waiting made me feel like I was walking inside its lungs. The compass still spun uselessly. My GPS blinked dead. I used the stars, though even they seemed to shift behind the aurora's restless veil. Every landmark I picked dissolved when I looked away. Still I marched, measuring distance by muscle burn alone. After hours, or maybe only minutes, time had unraveled, I crested a ridge and froze. Below me stretched the airstrip. It looked almost normal at first, a long, flat scar in the snow, windsocks limp, a skeletal tower hunched against the wind. Relief swelled until I saw the lights. Lanterns burned along the runway, not the clean white strobes of modern beacons, but old, flickering oil lamps. Their glow bled weak orange against the drifts, forming two neat rows like teeth. At the far end, a shape hunched on the ice. Not a plane, not a shelter, a chair. Just a single wooden chair, lit from above by the aurora's sickly green. My stomach tightened. This wasn't rescue. This was theater. Still, I descended. What choice did I have? My legs moved without asking permission, pulling me closer, step by weary step, until I stood at the runway's edge. The lanterns hissed in the wind, flames bending but never extinguishing. The chair waited, empty. Then a voice rose, amplified by the still air. My voice. Sit. I raised my rifle, throat dry. Not a chance. The wind carried laughter, my laughter. You've already chosen, Eric. Every step brought you here. I scanned the drifts. Shadows shifted just beyond the lantern light, figures pacing, circling. They didn't press in yet. What do you want from me? I shouted, the sound torn raw by the wind. The answer came in a chorus, 100 voices, layered, overlapping. Stay. The chair creaked though no one touched it. I could almost see myself sitting there already, head bowed, body slack, voice joining the chorus until it was no longer mine. I backed up a step, boots crunching. No, I make my own choices. The lanterns flickered, shadows swelling. The chair scraped forward across the runway without anyone pushing it. My body ached to sink into it, to rest, to stop fighting. That was when I realized the real trap. It didn't need my death. It needed my surrender. It wanted me to choose stillness, to offer myself willingly. That would complete the echo. Bind me in its chorus forever. No, I whispered. No. I swung the rifle and fired at the chair. The shot splintered wood, fragments scattering across the ice. For a heartbeat, silence held. Then the lanterns guttered out one by one till darkness swallowed the runway. The aurora flared, a blinding curtain of green. Shadows erupted from the drifts, dozens of me sprinting full tilt, faces twisted into screams. They rushed the strip, converging on me. I ran. Boots hammered the ice, sled rattling behind. My lungs tore for air. The doubles shrieked, closing in from every side. I hurled a flare behind me, its red light igniting the night. The shadows recoiled, but only for a second, then surged again. The control tower loomed ahead, half collapsed but standing. I crashed through its door, slammed it shut, and bolted the rusted latch. The whole structure groaned as though it resented my weight, but it held. For now. Inside, the air stank of mildew and oil. A stairwell spiraled upward, broken rails frosted with ice. I hauled myself up 2 steps at a time until I reached the top. Windows shattered, glass jagged, offered a view of the strip below. They were waiting, a sea of me, hundreds deep, pressed shoulder to shoulder, silent now, faces turned upward. Each one wore my expression, my scars, my exhaustion. And in the front row, closest of all, stood Henrik. Not a copy of me, Henrik himself, or close enough my eyes betrayed me. "Come down, brother," he said softly. His breath fogged the glass, though he stood outside. "You're so tired. Don't fight anymore." I pressed my forehead to the cold frame, trembling. My throat closed. "You're not him." Tears froze on my lashes. "You're not." Henrik smiled, sad and knowing. "But I could be, if you let me." The wind outside roared. The doubles shifted, boots scraping in unison, the sound a tidal wave of inevitability. My detonator was gone, my flares nearly spent, my strength frayed to threads. I had one card left, the tower's radio. I stumbled to the console, ancient dials rhymed with frost. My gloves fumbled at switches until static hissed through the speaker. I seized the mic, voice shaking. "This is Captain Eric Madsen, NATO Special Forces. Survivor stranded north of the Brooks Range. Coordinates compromised. If anyone hears me." The static warped, twisted, and my own voice bled back through. "This is Captain Eric Madsen. If anyone hears me, if anyone hears me, if anyone hears me." Over and over, my words looped, distorted, until the room rattled with echoes of myself. The shadows outside grinned, teeth glinting in aurora light. Henrik raised his hand, beckoning. The truth crashed down. There was no rescue, no signal. The radio was only another mouth for it to speak through, and it was already speaking with mine. I dropped the mic, chest heaving, head spinning. My reflection stared back from every broken window, every shimmer of frost. The chorus outside began to chant in unison in my voice, "You're one of us. You're one of us. You're one of us." The tower shook beneath their rhythm. Snow avalanched from the roof. Glass rattled in its frames. The chant filled me until I couldn't hear my own thoughts anymore. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. My own voice thundered against me, relentless, infinite. And for the first time, a crack opened in my will. What if they were right? What if I already was? The chant drilled into me like augers in ice. "You're one of us. You're one of us. You're one of us." It wasn't just sound anymore. It pressed against my skin, burrowed through the marrow, vibrated my ribs like tuning forks. Every syllable scraped through my skull until I couldn't tell if my own lips were moving with the crowd outside. I pressed gloved hands to my ears. It didn't help. The voices weren't out there. They were inside. The tower swayed, wind hammering its bones. Snow blasted through cracks, stinging my face, coating the radio console in white. My rifle lay heavy across my knees. It was a tool for men, for bullets and bodies, not for this. Henrik's voice cut through the chorus, clear, strong, unbearably tender. "Brother, you've carried this weight too long. Let it down." I squeezed my eyes shut. In the blackness behind my lids, I saw him. Not twisted, not broken, but young again, smiling in the half-light of a Copenhagen morning, lacing his boots as I ribbed him about being slow. For a moment, my body leaned forward, ready to rise, ready to open the door and step into that sea of familiar faces. To finally rest. To be done. But then another image clawed in, his real body, mangled on ice, headlights receding. The night I'd sworn never to forget. The night that built the man I was. "No," I rasped, voice shredded. "That's not you. That's a mask." The chorus faltered, voices glitching, some fragments of sound collapsing in on themselves like warped tape. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and patient, as though the thing was recalibrating. I forced myself to my feet, swaying, vision tunneling. My flare pouch was empty, my charges gone. Only the rifle and the radio remained, and both felt like toys against this leviathan of echoes. Unless the radio, not as a beacon, not as a receiver, but as a weapon. If it fed on voices, maybe I could overload it, feed it something it couldn't digest. I ripped open the console, tearing wires loose with frozen fingers until sparks spat. Static screamed through the speakers. The air thickened, buzzing like hornets in my teeth. The doubles outside froze mid-step, faces jerking upward in unison. Their mouths gaped, and for the first time since this nightmare began, they screamed. Not in chorus, not in control, but in pain. The sound was hideous, a distortion of my own voice shattered across 1,000 throats. I jammed the mic against the sparking wires, forcing raw current into the line. The static ballooned, fractured into frequencies not meant for human ears. My vision strobed white, my body convulsed. Outside, the aurora flared white-green, ribbons thrashing like struck serpents. The shadows writhed, doubling over, staggering into one another. Some collapsed into the snow, dissolving like wax under flame. Henrik's figure remained. He stood still, expression hollow, eyes black voids. His voice cut through the chaos, sharper than ever. If you do this, you'll burn with us. Maybe he was right. Maybe the feedback would fry me where I stood. But if I was already theirs, then this was my only chance to carve myself free. I gritted my teeth and twisted the last wire bare, shoving it against the circuit board. The world detonated in sound. A shriek like glaciers splitting filled every atom of the air. The tower shook so violently I thought it would collapse. My skull felt like it was cracking open, blood flooding my nose, hot in the freezing wind. The doubles outside melted, peeling apart in waves of snow and smoke, their forms collapsing back into the tundra. The chant disintegrated into garbled fragments before cutting off entirely. And then, silence. For the first time since this nightmare began, true silence. The aurora dimmed, bleeding back into natural curtains of green. The heartbeat under the snow ceased. The air tasted like frost and iron, but it was clean. I dropped to my knees, body shaking, ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. The radio console lay in ruins, smoke curling from its guts. My gloves were scorched. My breath came in ragged sobs. Outside, the runway lay empty. The lanterns were gone. The chair nothing but splinters scattered in the wind. No shadows, no echoes, just snow and stars. I stayed there, kneeling, too afraid to move, waiting for the voices to return. But none came. Only the creak of the tower, the hiss of drifting snow. Maybe, just maybe, I'd broken it. But as my pulse steadied, a new dread coiled in my gut. What if I hadn't destroyed it? What if I'd only forced it deeper into silence, waiting for me to weaken again? What if it was inside me now? My hands shook as I touched my throat, as though I might feel the echo living there, coiled and patient. My breath sounded like mine. My thoughts sounded like mine. But how would I know? The aurora flickered once more, faint, harmless, like curtains of green gauze across the stars. I staggered to my feet, every bone screaming, and forced myself down the stairwell. The door groaned open, snow stinging my face. I stepped onto the runway, testing each breath, each footfall. Still mine, still me. But behind me, in the shattered tower, the radio gave one last crackle, and from its ruined speaker, faint as the rustle of snow, came a whisper in my voice. You'll never know. I told myself over and over that the only way out was movement. Sitting in the tower had been a temptation to listen, to let myself be soothed into surrender by voices I wanted to believe were real. Now I had one last direction. East, toward the airstrip's far end and the line of dead trees that marked the old supply road. If I could put distance between me and that place, if I could find a ridge high enough to break sight lines, maybe sound would stop finding me. My sled dragged like a reluctant animal behind me. Snow burned my lungs with each breath. My muscles felt like cords of leather. Each step was a negotiation with pain. The night lay wide and empty, the aurora a thin bruise across the sky. The world had the brittle hush of something freshly broken. I kept the rifle slung across my back and the ruined radio hung from my belt like a token of vandalized hope. Every so often I pressed my ear to its speaker, half expecting a whisper, half daring whatever lived in it to speak. Only static hissed, then nothing. The silence was a wound I couldn't trust. The supply road appeared as a darker scar through the snow, a line of skeletal trees like teeth. I aimed for it and forced my legs to obey. With each step, the weight of the night pressed down, a pressure that had become more than weather. It felt moral, personal, something that judged by memory and found me wanting. Halfway to the road, I heard a sound that froze me in place, a soft, distant clinking like metal on ice. Not footsteps, something smaller. A signal? A bell? My throat closed. My hands went numb at my sides. "Hello," I called, voice paper thin. It scraped the air and died. The clinking came again. Closer. Then a figure moved between the trees, a man wrapped in fur, face obscured by frost-rimmed goggles. For a second, relief crashed through me. Another human. Hope bright, sharp, dangerous. He raised a gloved hand and the clinking stopped. He did not move toward me. He did not speak. The wind teased his coat, and for an impossible moment the stars shifted in his hood as if the sky lived beneath his skin. "You shouldn't be out here," he said finally, and the voice wasn't his. It was a dozen voices folded into one, layered and familiar. It said my name, not as a greeting, but as a verdict. I tightened my jaw. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "The one who waits, the one who remembers." The trees around him breathed. The clinking began again, a scrap of metal in his hand, rhythmical, patient. My legs moved before I let them. I stepped off the road to circle wide to keep trees between us and the open tundra. Whatever he was, it didn't need a body. I felt it in the air like a taste of metal on the tongue. It could be everywhere and nowhere. "Why me?" I asked the night, more to myself than to him. "Why choose me to break like this?" "Because you speak," the layered voice said. "Because you answer. Because you remember and you teach others to remember. That makes you useful." The speaker's breath fogged and then cleared. For half a heartbeat, I thought I saw my own hands inside his gloves, the same scar along the thumb. Then it was gone. I thought of the trainees, of the tent I had gone to recover, of my choices, the reasons I'd stayed behind, a calculus of ego and duty and a stubborn faith that I could fix things. How small those reasons felt now, like embers under a glacier. "I'm not useful to you," I said. "I won't be your echo." Something in the trees laughed. A soft, dry sound like branches cracking. "You already are," the voice hummed. "Your cadence, your pauses, the way you say my name in your head, you're woven into the drift." Anger flared hot, a flare inside a man half frozen. "Then take me. Take my shape, my voice. Leave my head." "Ah!" came the layered murmur, and for the first time I detected curiosity, not hunger. "You offer yourself willingly. How considerate." I didn't know whether to be insulted or terrified. "No," I said. "I don't offer anything." The man moved like a slow tide, and the trees behind him rearranged as if obeying a thought. Figures slipped out of shadow. No, not figures, impressions, softer than memory. They gathered around him in a loose ring, faces softened like wax under heat. Some wore sled harnesses, some held rifles, others cradled hands as though another lifetime's grief. "Why not?" the voice asked. "To stop the forgetting, to keep a shape that still speaks, to end the ache of losing names." Images bombarded me, faces of those I loved and lost, each melting into the next. Henrik's laugh, my mother at church, Jenkins's awkward salute. The night attempted a mercy. I felt the tug of it, a temptation I had underestimated, relief that came wrapped in recognition. To lie down and listen, to let the seam between memory and present sew itself closed. I thought of one thing then, a detail that had nowhere to live in the drift, a small wooden toy Henrik had carried as a child, a carved boat with a chipped prow. I'd kept it in my kit box for years, absurd memento, proof of a brother who'd been. The memory of it was sharp, private, ridiculous. If the thing wanted identity, it would find me through places like that. "You want my memories?" I said quietly. "Then you'll have to hear them as I do, not dressed in your chorus." The man, or whatever he was, tilted his head, almost like a human hearing a new tune. "Show me." I sat on my sled and fumbled in my jacket until my fingers closed around the tiny boat. The wood was as cold as memory. I held it out like a peace offering. "Once," I said, voice steadier than I felt, "we raced boats down the gutters after a storm. Henrik and I, he always let mine win, even though his was bigger. He'd laugh and tell me I was the bravest captain. He told me I'd never be alone." I felt the words like stepping stones across some black water. He lied, but he lied so well I believed it. Even now I can hear his laugh when the wind hits a corner of the house the right way. The layered voice was silent so long I thought it had left. Then it whispered, soft, low, almost aching. "You hold him inside like a jewel. How rare." "Then you already have what you want," I said, the logic simple and awful. "You don't need to own me. You can carry him among 1,000 voices and it will be a lie. Memory needs a hand to touch it, not a chorus to echo it. A pause. The trees drew a breath that sliced the air. The man's head dropped, and for the first time his layered voice faltered, cracked like old lacquer. Then perhaps we will take smaller things. Maybe that is enough. I felt it, then the pressure on the edges of my mind, like a tide deciding whether to break. The figures around us shivered, their forms losing definition, as if the night decided I had bargaining power. I should have moved then. I should have ran, shoved the sled, scrambled for the ridge. Instead, I stayed, stubborn as a cliff against a tide, and offered another memory, the worst and the truest. I told it the night of the accident, the smell of salt on the road, the way headlights smeared like an oil slick, the sound of metal folding. I said Henrik's name aloud until the trees knew the cadence and the syllables wore thin. When I finished, the man, this composite thief, lowered the metal in his hand. The clinking stopped. "You speak like a man," he said. "You bleed like a man. Perhaps you are not mine yet. For that, I will give you a gift." "Name it," I said, not trusting the sudden softness. "Sleep without dreams for one night," the voice replied. "You will wake clear of echoes for an hour. Use it poorly, and we come for the rest." I laughed. A harsh sound in the cold. A bargain with a threat. That's generous. "People once made worse bargains to keep living," the voice said. "Consider it your mercy and our patience." I didn't trust it, but I'd traded with worse men in my life and survived, sometimes despite the odds. An hour of clarity might be enough to reach a road, a town, a phone. It might not, but the alternative was to be pulled apart slowly, to become one of the chorus that smiled in my face. "All right," I said finally. 1 hour. The man set his clinking metal down at my feet, and the sound melted into snow. The figures faded like breath on glass. The aurora thinned. The air felt less sentient, easier to breathe. "Go," the layered voice said, and this time it sounded almost human. "Move before the dream thins." I should have been elated at the gift, at my chance. I was too tired to be anything but wary. The sled felt lighter when I shouldered it, though that might have been only hope. I started east again, toward the road that might mean salvation. Each step measured, each breath counted. The trees receded, the runway became a pale line, and the night contracted to the size of my torch beam. When the hour came, the air changed. The pressure eased, but then returned, gentler, like a hand tapping the hollow of a skull. On the radio, once more, a faint crackle. I pressed the receiver to my ear. A whisper answered. My voice, folded and patient, said, "You'll never know." I laughed then, a sound edged with fury and relief. "Maybe," I said aloud into the vastness, not to the voice, but to myself. But I remember. I walked until the sun threaded the horizon a raw silver, and the aurora bled back into ordinary morning. I found tracks in the snow that weren't mine, a set of vehicle treads, fresh and purposeful. I followed them, and when I reached the supply road, saw the tailgate of a ranger truck, dented and confused as if it had bounced into the drift. A man climbed down, cigarette stub glowing. He looked at me like one of those who still believed in straightforward dangers and even straighter answers. He did not gasp at my face, at the soot, at the haunted look in my eyes. He said only, "You're a sight." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say what I'd traded for that hour, to confess that part of me might be in the snow, and part of me might be sitting on a chair under the aurora, and that I'd left nothing for backups because I had exploded a ridge to keep this from spreading. But words failed. They always do after nights like that. I climbed into the truck, blanket pulled up to my chin, and watched the tundra recede like a wound healing. When we hit the highway and the truck's heater hummed like a blessed machine, I opened my palm and found the little wooden boat still there, its prow chipped but stubborn. Henrik's laugh ghosted at the edge of my vision and faded when I tried to reach it. I tucked the toy into my jacket, against my ribs, as if to keep it warm. Later, in a hospital bed with coffee gone cold beside me and faces hovering like daylight repairmen, a doctor asked me the usual things: how I'd survived alone, what trauma I'd seen, whether I'd heard voices. I told him something like the truth. I told him I'd seen snow take on the faces of men and that I'd convinced an echo to bargain for an hour so I could run. He nodded with a professional half-belief and prescribed rest, then left the room with instructions for follow-up. That night I lay awake and listened to the quiet. It felt ordinary and alien, like a page turned. When I thought I could trust myself, I went to the window, looked out at the city lights, and touched the little wooden boat in my pocket. It was warm enough to be real. Then, from the dark corridor beyond the nurse's station, a voice, soft and sure, whispered my name. It was mine. I did not answer.